Chapter 14 of First Lensman by E. Doc Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. First Lensman, Chapter 14. The employment office of any concern with personnel running into the hundreds of thousands is a busy place indeed, even when its plants are all on Tellus and its working conditions are as nearly ideal as such things can be made. When that firm's business is colonial, however, and its working conditions are only a couple of degrees removed from slavery, procurement of personnel is a first magnitude problem. The personnel department, like Alice in Wonderland, must run as fast as it can in order to stay where it is. Thus, the help-wanted advertisements of Uranium Incorporated covered the planet Earth with blandishment and guile. And thus, for 12 hours of every day and for 7 days of every week, the employment offices of Uranium Inc. were filled with men, mostly the scum of Earth. There were, of course, exceptions, one of which strode through the motley group of waiting men and thrust a card through the information wicket. He was a chunky-looking individual, appearing shorter than his actual 5 feet 9 because of 190 pounds of weight, even though every pound was placed exactly where it would do the most good. He looked, well, slouchy, and his mien was sullen. "Birkenfeld, by appointment," he growled through the wicket in a voice which could have been pleasantly deep. The coolly efficient blonde manipulated plugs. "Mr. George W. Jones, sir, by appointment." "Thank you, sir," and Mr. Jones was escorted into Mr. Birkenfeld's private office. "Have a chair, please, Mr. Jones." "So, you know." "Yes. It is seldom that a man of your education, training, and demonstrated ability applies to us for employment of his own initiative, and a very thorough investigation is indicated." "What am I here for, then?" the visitor demanded truculently. "You could have turned me down by mail. Everybody else has, since I got out." "You are here because we who operate on the frontiers cannot afford to pass judgment upon a man because of his past, unless that past precludes the probability of a useful future. Yours does not, and in some cases, such as yours, we are very deeply interested in the future." The official's eyes drilled deep. Conway Costigan had never been in the limelight. On the contrary, he had made inconspicuousness a passion and an art. Even in such scenes of violence as that which had occurred at the ambassador's ball, he managed to remain unnoticed. His lens had never been visible. No one except Lensman and Cleo and Jill knew that he had one, and Lensman and Cleo and Jill did not talk. Although he was calmly certain that this Birkenfeld was not an ordinary interviewer, he was equally certain that the investigators of Uranium Inc. had found out exactly and only what the patrol had wanted them to find. "So?" Jones' bearing altered subtly, and not because of the penetrant eyes. "That's all I want, a chance. I'll start at the bottom, as far down as you say." "We advertise, and truthfully, that opportunity on Iridian is unlimited." Birkenfeld chose his words with care. "In your case, opportunity will be either absolutely unlimited or zero, depending entirely upon yourself." "I see." Dumbness had not been included in the fictitious Mr. Jones' background. "You don't need to draw a blueprint." "You'll do, I think." The interviewer nodded in approval. "Nevertheless, I must make our position entirely clear. If the slip was, shall we say, accidental, you will go far with us. If you try to play false, you will not last long, and you will not be missed." "Fair enough." "Your willingness to start at the bottom is commendable, and it is a fact that those who come up through the ranks make the best executives, in our line at least. Just how far down are you willing to start?" "How low do you go?" "A mucker, I think, would be low enough, and from your build and obvious physical strength, the logical job." "Mucker?" "One who scoffers ore in the mine. Nor can we make any exception in your case as to the routines of induction and transportation." "Of course not." Take this slip to Mr. Calkins in room 6217. He will run you through the mill." And that night, in an obscure boarding-house, Mr. George Washington Jones, after a meticulous service special survey in every direction, reached a large and somewhat grimy hand into a screened receptacle in his battered suitcase and touched a lens. Cleo, the lovely mother of their wonderful children, appeared in his mind. "Made it, sweetheart. No suspicion at all. No more lensing for a while. Not too long, I hope. So long, Cleo." "Take it easy, Spud, darling, and be careful." Her tone was light, but she could not conceal a stark background of fear. "Oh, I wish I could go too." "I wish you could, Tootie." The linked minds flashed back to what the two had done together in the red opacity of Nevian murk, on Nevia's mighty, watery globe. But that kind of thinking would not do. "But the boys will keep in touch with me and keep you posted. And besides, you know how hard it is to get a babysitter." It is strange that the fundamental operations of working metalliferous veins have changed so little throughout the ages. Or is it? Ores came into being with the crusts of the planets. They change appreciably only with the passage of geologic time. Ancient mines, of course, could not go down very deep or follow a seam very far. There was too much water and too little air. The steam engine helped, in degree if not in kind, by removing water and supplying air. Tools improved, from the simple metal bar through pick and shovel and candle, through drill and hammer and low explosive and acetylene, through Sullivan slugger and high explosive and electrics, through scoffer and rotary and Burley and sourceless glow, to the complex gadgetry of today. But what fundamentally is the difference? Men still crawl, snake-like, to where the metal is. Men still, by dint of sheer brawn, jackass the precious stuff up to where our vaunted automatics can get hold of it. And men still die, in horribly unknown fashions and in callously recorded numbers, in the mines which supply the stuff upon which our vaunted culture rests. But to resume the thread of narrative, George Washington Jones went to Eridan as a common laborer, a mucker. He floated down beside the skip. A skip is a mine elevator, some 4,800 feet. He rode an ore car a horizontal distance of approximately 8 miles to the brilliantly illuminated cavern, which was the station of the 12th and lowest level. He was assigned to the bunk in which he would sleep for the next 15 nights. 15 down and 3 up ran the standard underground contract. He walked 400 yards, yelled, "Nothing down!" and inched his way up a rise, in many places scarcely wider than his shoulders, to the stope some 300 feet above. He reported to the miner who was to be his immediate boss, and bent his back to the scoffer, which, while not resembling a shovel at all closely, still meant hard physical labor. He already knew ore, the glossy, submetallic, pitchy black luster of uraninite or pitchblende, the yellows of autunite and carnotite, the variant and confusing greens of tobernite. No values went from Jones' scoffer into the heavily timbered, steel-braced waste pockets of the stope. Very little base rock went down the rise. He became accustomed to the work, got used to breathing the peculiarly lifeless, dry, oily, compressed air. And when, after a few days, his stentorian "Nothing down" called forth a "Nothing but a little fine stuff," and a handful of grit and pebbles, he knew that he had been accepted into the undefined, unwritten, and unofficial, yet nevertheless intensely actual, fellowship of hard rock men. He belonged. He knew that he must abandon his policy of invisibility, and after several days of thought, he decided how he would do it. Hence, upon the first day of his up period, he joined his fellows in their descent upon one of the rawest, noisiest dives of Danapolis. The men were met, of course, by a bevy of giggling, shrieking, garishly painted, and strongly perfumed girls, and at this point young Jones' behavior became exceedingly unorthodox. "Buy me a drink, mister? And a dance, huh?" "On your way, sister." He brushed the importunate wench aside. "I get enough exercise underground. and you ain't got a thing I want." Apparently unaware that the girl was exchanging meaningful glances with a couple of husky characters labeled bouncer in bill-poster type, the atypical mucker strode up to the long and ornate bar. "Give me a bottle of pineapple pop," he ordered brusquely, "and a package of Tellurian cigarettes. Sunshines." Pine—" The surprised bartender did not finish the word. The bouncers were fast, but Costigan was faster. A hard knee took one in the solar plexus. A hard elbow took the other so savagely under the chin as to all but break his neck. A bartender started to swing a bung starter and found himself flying through the air toward a table. Men, table, and drinks crashed to the floor. "I pick my own company, and I drink what I damn please," Jones announced grittily. "Them lunkers ain't hurt none to speak of." His hard eyes swept the room malevolently. "But I ain't in no gentle mood, and the next jaspers that tackle me will wind up in the repair shop, or maybe in the morgue. See?" This, of course, was much too much. A dozen embattled roughnecks leapt to mop up on the misguided wight who had so impugned the manhood of all Eridan. Then, while 6 or 7 bartenders blew frantic blasts upon police whistles, there was a flurry of action too fast to be resolved into consecutive events by the eye. Conway Costigan, one of the fastest men with hands and feet the patrol has ever known, was trying to keep himself alive, and he succeeded. "What the hell goes on here?" a chorus of raucously authoritative voices yelled, and 16 policemen — John Law did not travel singly in that district, but in platoons — swinging clubs and saps, finally hauled George Washington Jones out from the bottom of the pile. He had sundry abrasions and not a few contusions, but no bones were broken, and his skin was practically whole. And since his version of the affair was not only inadequate, but also differed in important particulars from those of several non-participating witnesses, he spent the rest of his holiday in jail, a development with which he was quite content. The work and time went on. He became in rapid succession a head mucker, a miner's pimp, which short and rugged Anglo-Saxon word means simply helper in underground parlance, a miner, a top miner, and then, a long step up the ladder, a shift boss. And then disaster struck, suddenly, paralyzingly, as mine disasters do. Loudspeakers blared briefly. "Explosion! Cave-in! Flood! Fire! Gas! Radiation! Damp!" and expired. Short circuits. There was no way of telling which, if any, of those dire warnings were true. The power failed, and the lights. The hiss of air from valves, a noise which, by its constant and unvarying and universal presence, soon becomes unheard, became noticeable because of its diminution in volume and tone. And then, seconds later, a jarring, shuddering rumble was felt and heard, accompanied by the snapping of shattered timbers and the sharper, utterly unforgettable shriek of rending and riven steel. And the men, as men do under such conditions, went wild, yelling, swearing, leaping toward where, in the rayless dark, each thought the rise to be. It took a couple of seconds for the shift boss to break out and hook up his emergency battery lamp, and 3 or 4 more seconds, and by dint of fists, feet, and a 2-foot length of air hose, to restore any degree of order. 4 men were dead, but that wasn't too bad, considering. "Up there, under the hanging wall," he ordered sharply. "That won't fall, unless the whole mountain slips. Now, how many of you Jaspers have got your emergency kits on you? 12? Out of 26. What brains! Put on your masks. You without 'em can stay up here. You'll be safe for a while, I hope." Then, presently, "There, that's all for now, I guess." He flashed his light downward. The massive steel members no longer writhed. The crushed and tortured timbers were still. "That rise may be open. It goes through solid rock, not waste. I'll see. Right, you're all in one piece, aren't you?" "I guess so, yes." "Take charge up here. I'll go down to the drift. If the rise is open, I'll give you a flash. Send the ones with masks down one at a time. Take a jolly bar and bash the brains out of anybody who gets panicky again." Jones was not as brave as he sounded. Mine disasters carry a terror which is uniquely and peculiarly poignant. Nevertheless, he went down the rise, found it open, and signaled. Then, after issuing brief orders, he led the way along the dark and silent drift toward the station, wondering profanely why the people on duty there had not done something with the wealth of emergency equipment always ready there. The party found some cave-ins, but nothing they could not dig through. The station was also silent and dark. Jones, flashing his headlamp upon the emergency panel, smashed the glass, wrenched the door open, and pushed buttons. Lights flashed on. Warning signals flared, bellowed, and rang. The rotary air pump began again its normal, subdued, whickering whir. But the water pump, shuddering, clanking, groaning, it was threatening to go out any second. But there wasn't a thing in the world Jones could do about it, yet. The station itself, so buttressed and pillared with alloy steel as to be little more compressible than an equal volume of solid rock, was unharmed, but in it nothing lived. 4 men and a woman, the nurse, were stiffly motionless at their posts. Apparently, the leads to the station had been blasted in such fashion that no warning whatever had been given. And smoke, billowing inward from the main tunnel, was growing thicker by the minute. Jones punched another button. A foot-thick barrier of asbestos, tungsten, and vitrified refractory slid smoothly across the tunnel's opening. He considered briefly, pityingly, those who might be outside, but felt no urge to explore. If any lived, there were buttons on the other side of the fire door. The eddying smoke disappeared. The flaring lights winked out. Air horns and bells relapsed into silence. The shift boss, now apparently the superintendent of the whole 12th level, removed his mask, found the station walkie-talkie, and snapped a switch. He spoke, listened, spoke again, then called a list of names, none of which brought any response. "Right, and you 5 others," picking out miners who could be depended upon to keep their heads. "Take these guns. Shoot if you have to, but not unless you have to. Have the muckers clear the drift, just enough to get through. You'll find a shift boss with a crew of 19 up in Stope 60. Their rise is blocked. They've got light and power again now, and good air, and they're working on it, but opening the rise from the top is a damn slow job. Right, you throw a chippy into it from the bottom. You others, work back along the drift clear to the last glory hole. Be sure that all the rises are open. Check all the stopes and glory holes. Tell everybody you find alive to report to me here." "Oh, what good?" a man shrieked. "We're all goners anyway. I want water, and—" "Shut up, fool." There was a sound as of fist meeting flesh. The shriek was stilled. "Plenty of water. Tanks full of the stuff." A grizzled miner turned to the self-appointed boss and twitched his head toward the laboring pump. "Too damn much water too soon, huh?" "I wouldn't wonder, but get busy." As his now orderly and purposeful men disappeared, Jones picked up his microphone and changed the setting of a dial. "On top, somebody," he said crisply. "On top." "Oh, there's somebody alive down in 12 after all," a girl's voice screamed in his ear. "Mr. Clancy! Mr. Edwards!" "To hell with Clancy, and Edwards too," Jones barked. "Gimme the chief engineer and the head surveyor, and gimme 'em fast." "Clancy speaking, Station 12. If Works Manager Clancy had heard that pointed remark, and he must have, he ignored it. "Stanley and Emerson will be here in a moment. In the meantime, who's calling? I don't recognize your voice, and it's been so long." "Jones, shift boss, Stope 59. I had a little trouble getting here to the station." "What? Where's Penwaye and Riley and Ted? Everybody. Gas or damp. No warning." "Not enough to turn on anything? Not even the purifiers?" "Nothing." "Where were you?" "Up in the Stope." "Good God!" That news to Clancy was informative enough. "But to hell with all that. What happened and where?" "A skipload, and then a magazine of high explosive right at Station 7. It's right at the main shaft, you know." Jones did not know, since he had never been in that part of the mine, but he could see the picture. Main shaft filled up to above 7, and both emergency shafts blocked. Number 1 at 6, number 2 at 7. Must have been a fault, but here's Chief Engineer Stanley. The works manager, not too unwillingly, relinquished the microphone. A miner came running up, and Jones covered his mouthpiece. "How about the glory holes?" Plug solid, all 4 of 'em. By the vibro, clear up to 11. Thanks. Then, as soon as Stanley's voice came on, What I want to know is, why is this damned water pump overloading? What's the circuit? You must be... Yes, you are pumping against too much head. 5 levels above you are dead, you know, so... Dead? Can't you raise anybody? Not yet. So you're pumping through dead boosters on 11 and 10 and so on up, and when your overload relief valve opens... Relief valve? Jones almost screamed. Can I dog the damn thing down? No, it's internal. Christ, what a design. I could eat a handful of iron filings and puke a better emergency pump than that. When it opens, Stanley went stolidly on, the water will go through the bypass back into the pump, so you better rod out one of the glory holes and... Get conscious, fathead, Jones blazed. What would we use for time? Get off the air. Give me Emerson. Emerson speaking. Got your maps? Yes. We got to run a seg up to 11, fast or drown. Can you give me the shortest possible distance? Can do. The head surveyor snapped orders. We'll have it for you in a minute. Thank God there was somebody down there with a brain. It doesn't take superhuman intelligence to push buttons. You'd be surprised. Your point on glory holes was very well taken. You won't have much time after the pump quits. When the water reaches the station... Curtains. And it's all done now, running free and easy, recirculating. Hurry that dope. Here it is now. Start at the highest point of Stope 59. Repeat. Stope 59. Jones waved a furious hand as he shouted the words. The tight-packed miners turned and ran. The shift boss followed them, carrying the walkie-talkie, aiming an exasperated kick of pure frustration at the merrily humming water pump as he passed it. 32 degrees from vertical. Anywhere between 30 and 35. 30 to 35 off vertical. Direction, got a compass? Yes. Set the blue on 0, course 275 degrees. Blue on 0, course 275. Deck 69.20 feet. That'll put you into 11's class yard, so big you can't miss it. Distance 69.2. That all? Fine. Maybe we'll make it after all. They're sinking a shaft, of course. From where? About 4 miles in on 6. It'll take time. If we can get up to 11, we'll have all the time on the clock. It'll take a week or more to flood 12 stopes. But this sag is sure as hell going to be touch and go. And say, from the throw of the pump and the volume of the sump, will you give me the best estimate you can of how much time we've got? I want at least an hour, but I'm afraid I won't have it. Yes, I'll call you back. The shift boss elbowed his way through the throng of men and, dragging the radio behind him, wriggled and floated up the rise. Right, he bellowed, the echoes resounding deafeningly all up and down the narrow tube. You up there ahead of me? Yeah, that worthy bellowed back. More men left than I thought. How many? Half of 'em? Just about. Good. Sort out the ones you got up there by trades. Then, when he had emerged into the now brilliantly illuminated stope, Where are the timber pimps? Over there. Russell Timbers. Whatever you can find, and wherever you can find it, grab it and bring it up here. Get some 12-inch steel, too, 6 feet long. Timberman, grab that stuff off the face and start your staging right here. You muckers, rig a couple of scoffers to throw muck to bury the base and checker work up to the hanging wall. Doze a sluice way down into that waste pocket there, so we won't clog ourselves up. Work fast, fellows, but make it solid. You know the load it'll have to carry and what will happen if it gives. They knew. They knew what they had to do and did it, furiously but with care and precision. How wide a sag you figuring on, Soup? The boss timberman asked. 8-foot checker work to the hanging anyway, huh? Yes, I'll let you know in a minute. The surveyor came in. 41 minutes is my best guess. From when? From the time the pump failed. That was 4 minutes ago, nearer 5. And 5 more before we can start cutting. 41 less 10 is 31. 31 into 69.2 goes 2.23 feet per minute, my slipstick says. Thanks. Right. What would you say is the biggest sag we can cut in this kind of rock at 2 1/4 feet a minute? The miner scratched his whiskery chin. "That's a tough one, boss. You'll have to figure damn close to 100 pounds of air to the foot on plain cuttin'. That's 200 and a quarter. But without a burley to pimp for her, a rotary can't take that kind of air. She'll foul herself to a standstill before she cuts a foot. And with a burley riggin', she's got to make damn near a double cut. 7 foot inside, figure. So, any way you look at it, you ain't going to cut no 2 foot to the minute." "I was hoping you wouldn't check my figures, but you do. So, we'll cut 5 feet. Saw your timbers accordingly. We'll hold that burley by hand." Wright shook his head dubiously. "We don't want to die down here any more than you do, boss, so we'll do our damnedest. But how in hell do you figure you can hold her to her work?" "Rig a yoke. Cut a stretcher up for canvas and padding. It'll pound, but a man can stand almost anything in short enough shifts if he's got to or die." And for a time, 2 minutes to be exact, during which the rotary chewed up and spat out a plug of rock over 5 feet deep, things went very well indeed. 2 men, instead of the usual 3, could run the rotary. That is, they could tend the complicated pneumatic walking jacks, which not only oscillated the cutting demon in a geometrical path, but also rammed it against the face with a steadily held and enormous pressure, even while climbing almost vertically upward under a burden of over 20,000 pounds. An armored hand waved a signal. Voice was utterly useless. Up. A valve was flipped. A huge, flat steel foot arose. A timber slid into place, creaking and groaning as that big flat foot smashed down. Up again. Up a third time. 18 seconds. Less than 1/3 of a minute. 10 inches gained. And while it was not easy, 2 men could hold the burley in 1-minute shifts. As has been intimated, this machine pimped for the rotary. It waited on it, ministering to its every need with a singleness of purpose impossible to any except robotic devotion. It picked the rotary's teeth, it freed its linkages, it deloused its ports, it cleared its spillways of compacted debris. It even, and this is a feat starkly unbelievable to anyone who does not know the hardness of neocarb alloy and the tensile strength of ultra-special steels, it even changed, while in full operation, the rotary's diamond-tipped cutters. Both burley and rotary were extremely efficient, but neither was either quiet or gentle. In their quietest moments they shrieked and groaned and yelled, producing a volume of sound in which nothing softer than a cannon shot could have been heard. But when, in changing the rotary's cutting teeth, the burley's fingers were driven into and through the solid rock, a matter of merest routine to both machines, the resultant blast of sound cannot even be imagined, to say nothing of being described. And always both machines spewed out torrents of rock, in sizes ranging from impalpable dust up to chunks as big as a fist. As the sag lengthened and the checkerwork grew higher, the work began to slow down. They began to lose the time they had gained. There were plenty of men, but in that narrow bore there simply was not room for enough men to work. Even through that storm of dust and hurtling rock, the timbermen could get their blocking up there, but they could not place it fast enough. There were too many other men in the way. One of them had to get out. Since one man could not possibly run the rotary, one man would have to hold the burley. They tried it, one after another. No soap. It hammered them flat. The rotary, fouled in every tooth and channel and vent under the terrific thrust of 230 pounds of air, merely gnawed and slid. The timbermen now had room, but nothing to do. And Jones, who had been biting at his mustache and ignoring the frantic walkie-talkie for minutes, stared grimly at watch and tape. 3 minutes left and over 8 feet to go. "Give me that armor," he rasped, and climbed the blocks. "Open the air wide open. Give her the whole 250. Get down, Mac. I'll take her the rest of the way." He put his shoulders to the improvised yoke, braced his feet, and heaved. The burley, screaming and yelling and clamoring, went joyously to work, both ways. God, what punishment! The rotary, free and clear, chewed rock more viciously than ever. An armored hand smote his leg. "Lift!" He lifted that foot, set it down 2 inches higher. The other one, 4 inches. 6. 1 foot. 2. 3. Lord of ancients! Was this lifetime of agony only 1 minute? Or wasn't he holding her? Had the damn thing stopped cutting? No, it was still cutting. The rocks were banging against and bouncing off his helmet as viciously and as numerously as ever. He could sense, rather than feel, the furious fashion in which the relays of timbermen were laboring to keep those high-stepping jacks in motion. No, it had been only 1 minute. Twice that long yet to go. God, nothing could be that brutal. A bull elephant couldn't take it. But by all the gods of space and all the devils in hell, he'd stay with it until that sag broke through. And grimly, doggedly, toward the end, 9/10 unconsciously, Lensman Conway Costigan stayed with it. And in the stope so far below, a new and highly authoritative voice blared from the speaker. "Jones! God damn it, Jones, answer me! If Jones isn't there, somebody else answer me! Anybody!" "Yes, sir?" Wright was afraid to answer that peremptory call, but more afraid not to. "Jones, this is Clancy." "No, sir, not Jones. Wright, sir, top miner." "Where's Jones?" "Up in the sag, sir. He's holding the Burley, alone." "Alone? Hell's purple fires! Tell him to— How many men has he got on the rotary?" "2, sir. That's all they's got room for." "Tell him to quit it. Put somebody else on it. I won't have him killed, damn it." "He's the only one strong enough to hold it, sir, but I'll send up word." Word went up via sign language and came back down. "Begging your pardon, sir, but he says to tell you to go to hell, sir. He won't have no time for chit-chat, he says, until this goddamn sag is through or the juice goes off, sir." A blast of profanity erupted from the speaker, of such violence that the thoroughly scared Wright threw the walkie-talkie down the waste chute, and in the same instant the rotary crashed through. Dazed, groggy, barely conscious from his terrific effort, Jones stared owlishly through the heavy, steel-braced lenses of his helmet, while the timberman set a few more courses of wood and the rotary walked itself and the clinging Burley up and out of the hole. He climbed stiffly out, and as he stared at the pillar of light flaring upward from the sag, his gorge began to rise. "Why's the idea of that damn surveyor lying to us like that?" he babbled. "We had oodles and oodles of time. Didn't have to kill ourselves. Damn water ain't got there yet. Was the big—" He wobbled weakly and took one short step, and the lights went out. The surveyor's estimate had been impossibly, accidentally close. They had had a little extra time, but it was measured very easily in seconds. And Jones, logical to the end in a queerly addled way, stood in the almost palpable darkness and wobbled and thought. If a man couldn't see anything with his eyes wide open, he was either blind or unconscious. He wasn't blind, therefore he must be unconscious and not know it. He sighed, wearily and gratefully, and collapsed. Battery lights were soon reconnected, and everybody knew that they had holed through. There was no more panic, and even before the shift boss had recovered full consciousness, he was walking down the drift toward Station 11. There is no need to enlarge upon the rest of that grim and grisly affair. Level after level was activated, and, since working upward in mines is vastly faster than working downward, the two parties met on the 8th level. Half of the men who would otherwise have died were saved, and, much more important from the viewpoint of Uranium Inc., the deeper and richer half of the biggest and richest uranium mine in existence, instead of being out of production for a year or more, would be back in full operation in a couple of weeks. And George Washington Jones, still a trifle shaky from his ordeal, was called into the front office. But before he arrived, "I'm going to make him assistant works manager," Clancy announced. "I think not." "But listen, Mr. Isaacson, please. How do you expect me to build up a staff if you snatch every good man I find away from me?" "You didn't find him. Birkenfeld did. He was here only on a test. He is going into Department Q." Clancy, who had opened his mouth to continue his protests, shut it wordlessly. He knew that Department Q was Department Q. End of Chapter 14. Chapter 15 of First Lensman by E. Doc Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. First Lensman, Chapter 15. Costigan was not surprised to see the man he had known as Birkenfeld in Uranium's ornate conference room. He had not expected, however, to see Isaacson. He knew, of course, that Spaceways owned Uranium Inc. and the planet Eridan, lock, stock, and barrel, but it never entered his modest mind that his case would be of sufficient importance to warrant the personal attention of the big noise himself. Hence, the sight of that suave and unrevealing face gave the putative Jones a more than temporary qualm. Isaacson was top-bracket stuff, way out of his class. Virgil Samms ought to be taking this assignment, but since he wasn't... But instead of being an inquisition, the meeting was friendly and informal from the start. They complimented him upon the soundness of his judgment and the accuracy of his decisions. They thanked him, both with words and with a considerable sum of expendable credits. They encouraged him to talk about himself, but there was nothing whatever of the Star Chamber or of cross-examination. The last question was representative of the whole conference. "One other thing, Jones, has me slightly baffled," Isaacson said with a really winning smile. "Since you do not drink, and since you are not in search of feminine, companionship, just why did you go down to Roaring Jack's dive?" "Two reasons," Jones said, with a somewhat shamefaced grin. "The minor one isn't easy to explain, but, well, I hadn't been having an exactly easy time of it on Earth. You all know about that, I suppose?" They knew. "Well, I was taking a very dim view of things in general, and a good fight would get it out of my system. It always does." "I see. And the major reason?" "I knew, of course, that I was on probation. I would have to get promoted, and fast, or stay sunk forever. To get promoted fast, a man can either be enough of a bootlicker to be pulled up from on high, or he can be shoved up by the men he is working with. The best way to get a crowd of hard rock men to like you is to lick a few of 'em. Off hours, of course, and according to Hoyle, and the more of 'em you can lick at once, the better. I'm pretty good at rough-and-tumble brawling, so I gambled that the cops would step in before I got banged up too much. I won." "I see," Isaacson said again, in an entirely different tone. He did see now. "The first technique is so universally used that the possibility of the second did not occur to me. Nice work. Very nice." He turned to the other members of the board. "This, I believe, concludes the business of the meeting?" For some reason or other, Isaacson nodded slightly as he asked the question, and one by one, as though in concurrence, the others nodded in reply. The meeting broke up. Outside the door, however, the magnate did not go about his own business, nor send Jones about his. Instead, "I would like to show you, if I may, the above-ground part of our works." "My time is yours, sir. I am interested." It is unnecessary here to go into the details of a civilization's greatest uranium operation. The storage bins, the grinders, the Wilfley tables and slime tanks, the flotation sluices, the roasters and reducers, the processes of solution and crystallization and recrystallization, of final oxidation and reduction. Suffice it to say that Isaacson showed Jones the whole immensity of Uranium Works No. 1. The trip ended on the top floor of the towering administration building, in a heavily screened room containing a desk, a couple of chairs, and a tremendously massive safe. "Smoke up." Isaacson indicated a package of Jones' favorite brand of cigarettes and lighted a cigar. "You knew that you were under a test. I wonder, though, if you knew how much of it was testing." "All of it," Jones grinned. "Except for the big blow, of course." "Of course." "There were too many possibilities, of too many different kinds, too pat. I might warn you, though, I could have got away clear with that $500,000. The possibility existed. Surprisingly, Isaacson did not tell him that the trap was more subtle than it had appeared to be. It was, however, worth the risk. Why didn't you? Because I figure on making more than that a little later, and I might live longer to spend it. Sound thinking, my boy. Really sound. Now, you noticed, of course, the vote at the end of the meeting? Jones had noticed it, and although he did not say so, he had been wondering about it ever since. The older man strolled over to the safe and opened it, revealing a single, startlingly small package. You passed unanimously. You are now learning what you have to know. Now that we trust you unreservedly, you will be watched for a long time, and before you can make one false step, you will die. That would seem to be good business, sir. Glad you look at it that way. We thought you would. You saw the works. Quite an operation, don't you think? Immense, sir. The biggest thing I ever saw. What would you say, then, to the idea of this office being our real headquarters, of that little package there being our real business? He swung the safe door shut, spun the knob. It would have been highly surprising a couple of hours ago. Costigan could not afford to appear stupid, nor to possess too much knowledge. He had to steer an extremely difficult middle course. After the climax of this build-up, though, it wouldn't seem at all impossible, or that there were wheels, plenty of 'em, within wheels. Smart, Isaacson applauded. And what would you think might be in that package? This room is ray-proof. Against anything the Galactic Patrol can swing? Positively. Well, then, it might be something beginning with the letter... He flicked 2 fingers, almost invisibly fast, into a T, and went on without a break, M as in morphine. Your caution and restraint are commendable. If I had any remaining doubt as to your ability, it is gone. He paused, frowning. As belief in ability increased, that in sincerity lessened. This doubt, this questioning, existed every time a new executive was initiated into the mysteries of Department Q. The board's judgment was good. They had slipped only twice, and those 2 errors had been corrected easily enough. The fellow had been warned once. That was enough. He took the plunge. You will work with the assistant works manager here until you understand the duties of the position. You will be transferred to Tellus as assistant works manager there. Your principal duties will, however, be concerned with Department Q, which you will head up one day if you make good. And, just incidentally, when you go to Tellus, a package like that one in the safe will go with you. Oh, I see. I'll make good, sir. Jones let Isaacson see his jaw muscles tighten in resolve. It may take a little time for me to learn my way around, sir, but I'll learn it. I'm sure you will. And now to go into greater detail. Virgil Samms had to be sure of his facts. More than that, he had to be able to prove them, not merely to the satisfaction of a law enforcement officer, but beyond any reasonable doubt of the hardest-headed member of a cynical and skeptical jury. Wherefore, Jack Kinnison and Mace Northrop took up the Thionite Trail at the exact point where, each trip, George Olmsted had had to abandon it, in the atmosphere of Covenda. And, fortunately, not too much preparation was required. Covenda was, as has been intimated, a primitive world. Its native people, humanoid in type, had developed a culture approximating in some respects that of the North American Indian at about the time of Columbus, in others that of the ancient nomads of Araby. Thus a couple of wandering natives, unrecognizable under their dirty, storm-proof blankets and their scarcely thinner layers of grease and grime, watched impassively, incuriously, while a box floated pendant from its parachute from sky to ground. Mounted upon their uncouth steeds, they followed that box when it was hauled to the white man's village. Unlike many of the other natives, these 2 did not shuffle into that village, to lean silently against a rock or a wall, awaiting their turns to exchange a few hours of simple labor for a container of a new and highly potent beverage. They did, however, keep themselves constantly and minutely informed as to everything these strange, devil-ridden white men did. One of these pseudo-natives wandered off into the wilderness 2 or 3 days before the huge thing which flies without wings left ground, the other immediately afterward. Thus the departure of the spaceship from Covenda was recorded, as was its arrival at Eridan. It had been extremely difficult for the patrol's engineers to devise ways and means of tracing that ship from departure to arrival without exciting suspicion, but it had not proved impossible. And Jack Kinnison, lounging idly and elegantly in the concourse of Dinopolis Spaceport, seethed imperceptibly. Having swallowed a tiny service special capsule that morning, he knew that he had been under continuous spy ray inspection for over 2 hours. He had not given himself away. Practically everybody screened their inside coat pockets and hip pockets, and the cat whisker lead from lens to leg simply could not be seen. But for all the good they were doing him, his ultra instruments might just as well have been back on Tellus. "Mace," he sent, with no change whatever in the vapid expression then on his face. "I'm still covered. Are you?" "Covered." The answering thought was a snort. "They're covering me like water covers a submarine." "Keep tuned. I'll call Spud." "Spud!" "Come in, Jack." Conway Costigan, alone now in the sanctum of Department Q, did not seem to be busy, but he was. "That red herring they told us to drag across the trail was too damned red. They must be touchier than fulminate to spy work on their armed forces. Neither Mace nor I can do a lick of work. Anybody else covered?" "No, all clear." "Good. Tell them the Zwilnik blockers took us out." "I'll do that. Distance only, or is somebody on your tail?" "Somebody, and I mean somebody. A slick chick with a classy chassis. A blonde with great big come-hither eyes. Too good to be true, especially the falsies. Wiring, my friend. And I haven't been able to get a close look, but I wouldn't wonder if her nostrils had a skillionth of a millimeter too much expansion. I want a spy ray up. Is it safe to use Fred?" Kinnison referred to the grizzled engineer now puttering about in a certain spaceship, not the one in which he and Northrop had come to Eridan. "Definitely not. I can do it myself and still stay very much in character. No, I don't know her. Not surprising, of course, since the policy here is never to let the right hand know what the left is doing. How about you, Mace? Have you got a little girlfriend, too?" "Yea, verily, brother, but not little. More my size." Northrop pointed out a tall, trim brunette, strolling along with the effortless, consciously unconscious poise of the professional model. I don't know her either," Costigan reported. "But both of them are wearing 4-inch spy ray blocks and are probably wired up like Christmas trees. By inference, P-gun proof. I can't penetrate, of course, but maybe I can get a viewpoint. You're right, Jack. Nostrils plugged. Anti-thionite, anti-V2, anti-everything. In fact, anti-social. I'll spread their pictures around and see if anybody knows either of them." He did so, and over 100 of the patrol's shrewdest operatives. Upon this occasion, North America had invaded Eridan in force, studied and thought. No one knew the tall brunette, but "I know the blonde." This was Parker of Washington, a service ace for 25 years. "Hellcat Hazel. D-Force, the hardest-boiled babe unhung. Watch your step around her. She's just as handy with a knife and knockout drops as she is with a gun." "Thanks, Parker. I've heard of her." Costigan was thinking fast. "Freelance. No way of telling who she's working for at the moment." This was a statement, not a question. "Only that it would have to be somebody with a lot of money. Her price is high. That all?" "That's all, fellows." Then to Jack and Northrop. "My thought is that you two guys are completely outclassed. Outweighed, outnumbered, outmanned, and outgunned. Undressed, you're sitting ducks. And if you put out any screens, it'll crystallize their suspicions and they'll grab you right then. Or maybe even knock you off. You'd better get out of here at full blast. You can't do any more good here, the way things are." "Sure we can," Kinnison protested. "You wanted a diversion, didn't you?" "Yes, but what we've done already isn't a patch to what we can do next. We can set up such a diversion that the boys can walk right on the thionite carrier's heels without anybody paying any attention. By the way, you don't know yet who is going to carry it, do you?" "No, no penetration at all." "You soon will, bucko. Watch our smoke." "What do you think you're going to do?" Costigan demanded sharply. "This," Jack explained. "And don't try to say no. We're on our own, you know." "Well, it sounds good, and if you can pull it off, it will help no end. Go ahead." The demurely luscious blonde stared disconsolately at the bulletin board, upon which another 30 minutes was being added to the time of arrival of a ship already 3 hours late. She picked up a book, glanced at its cover, put it down. Her hand moved toward a magazine, drew back, dropped idly into her lap. She sighed, stifled a yawn prettily, leaned backward in her seat. In such a position, Jack noticed that he could not see into her nostrils, and closed her eyes. And Jack Kinnison, coming visibly to a decision, sat down beside her. "Pardon me, miss, but I feel just like you look. Can you tell me why convention decrees that 2 people, stuck in this concourse by arrivals that nobody knows when will arrive, have got to suffer alone when they could have so much more fun suffering together?" The girl's eyes opened slowly. She was neither startled nor afraid, nor, it seemed, even interested. In fact, she gazed at him with so much disinterest, and for so long a time, that he began to wonder, was she going to play sweet and innocent to the end? "Yes, conventions are stupid sometimes," she admitted finally, her lovely lips curving into the beginnings of a smile. Her voice, low and sweet, matched perfectly the rest of her charming self. "After all, perfectly nice people do meet informally on shipboard. Why not in concourses?" "Why not, indeed? And I'm perfectly nice people, I assure you. Willie Borden is the name. My friends call me Bill. And you?" "Beatrice Bailey. B for short. Tell me what you like, and we'll talk about it." "Why talk when we could be eating? I'm with a guy. He's out on the field somewhere, a big bruiser with a pencil-striped black mustache. Maybe you saw him talking to me a while back?" "I think so, now that you mention him. Too big, much too big." The girl spoke carelessly, but managed to make it very clear that Jack Kinnison was just exactly the right size. "Why?" "I told him I'd have supper with him. Shall we hunt him up and eat together?" "Why not? Is he alone?" "He was when I saw him last." Although Jack knew exactly where Northrop was and who was with him, he had to play safe. He did not know how much this B. Bailey really knew. "He knows a lot more people around here than I do, though, so maybe he isn't now. Let me carry some of that plunder." "You might carry those books, thanks, but the field is so big. How do you expect to find him? Or do you know where he is?" He denied vigorously. This was the critical moment. She certainly wasn't suspicious, yet, but she was showing signs of not wanting to go out there, and if she refused to go— "To be honest, I don't care whether I find him or not. The idea of ditching him appeals to me more and more. So how about this? We'll dash out to the 3rd dock, just so I won't have to actually lie about looking for him, and dash right back here. Or wouldn't you rather have it a twosome?" I refused to answer, by advice of counsel. The girl laughed gaily, but her answer was plain enough. The rate of progress was by no means a dash, and Kinnison did not look, with his eyes, for Northrop. Nevertheless, just south of the 3rd dock, the 2 couples met. "My cousin, Grace James," Northrop said, without a tremor or a quiver. "Wild Willie Borden, Grace. Usually called Baldy on account of his hair." The girls were introduced, each vouchsafing the other a completely meaningless smile and a colorlessly conventional word of greeting. Were they, in fact, as in seeming, total strangers, Or were they, in fact, working together as closely as were the two young lensmen themselves? If that was acting, it was a beautiful job. Neither man could detect the slightest flaw in the performance of either girl. "Whither away, pilot?" Jack allowed no lapse of time. "You know all the places around here. Lead us to a good one." "This way, my old and fragrant fruit." Northrop led off with a flourish, and again Jack tensed. The walk led straight past the third-class, apparently deserted dock of which a certain ultra-fast vessel was the only occupant. If nothing happened for 15 more seconds, nothing did. The laughing, chattering four came abreast of the portal. The door swung open, and the lensmen went into action. They did not like to strong-arm women, but speed was their first consideration, with safety a close second, and it is impossible for a man to make speed while carrying a conscious, lithe, strong, heavily armed woman in such a position that she cannot use fists, feet, teeth, gun, or knife. An unconscious woman, on the other hand, can be carried easily and safely enough. Therefore, Jack spun his partner around, forced both of her hands into one of his. The free hand flashed upward toward the neck. A hard finger pressed unerringly against a nerve. The girl went limp. The two victims were hustled aboard, and the spaceship, surrounded now by full-coverage screen, took off. Kinnison paid no attention to ship or course. Orders had been given long since and would be carried out. Instead, he lowered his burden to the floor, spread her out flat, and sought out and removed item after item of wiring, apparatus, and offensive and defensive armament. He did not undress her, quite, but he made completely certain that the only weapons left to the young lady were those with which nature had endowed her. And Northrop, having taken care of his alleged cousin with equal thoroughness, the small arms were sent out, and both doors of the room were securely locked. "Now, Hellcat Hazel DeForce," Kinnison said conversationally, "you can snap out of it any time. You've been back to normal for at least 2 minutes. You've found out that your famous sex appeal won't work. There's nothing loose you can grab, and you're too smart an operator to tackle me bare-handed. Who's the captain of your team, you or the clothes horse?" "Clothes horse!" the statuesque brunette exclaimed, but her protests were drowned out. The blonde could, and did, talk louder, faster, and rougher. "Do you think you can get away with this?" she demanded. "Why, you—" And the unexpurgated, trenchant, brilliantly detailed characterization would have seared its way through 4-ply asbestos. "And just what do you think you're going to do with me?" "As to the first, I think so," Kinnison replied, ignoring the deep space verbiage. "As to the second, as of now, I don't know. What would you do if our situations were reversed?" "I'd blast you to a cinder, or else take a knife and—" "Hazel!" the brunette cautioned sharply. "Careful! You'll touch them off, and they'll—" "Shut up, Jane. They won't hurt us any more than they have already. It's psychologically impossible. Isn't that true, Copper?" Hazel lighted a cigarette, inhaled deeply, and blew a cloud of smoke at Kinnison's face. "Pretty much so, I guess," the lensman admitted, frankly enough. "But we can't put you away for the rest of your lives." "Space happy? Or do you think I am?" she sneered. "What would you use for a case? We're as safe as if we were in God's pocket. And besides, our positions will be reversed pretty quick. You may not know it, but the fastest ships in space are chasing us right now." "For once, you're wrong. We've got plenty of legs ourselves, and we're blasting for rendezvous with a task force. But enough of this chatter. I want to know what job you're on and why you picked on us. Give." "Oh, does-oo," Hazel cooed venomously. "Come and sit on Mama's lap, itty-bitty soldier boy, and she'll tell you everything you want to know." Both lensmen probed then, with everything they had, but learned nothing of value. The women did not know what the patrolmen were trying to do, but they were so intensely hostile that their mental blocks, unconscious although they were as effective as full-driven thought screens against the most insidious approaches the men could make. "Anything in their handbags, Mace?" Jack asked finally. "I'll look. Nothing much. Just this." And the very tonelessness of Northrop's voice made Jack look up quickly. "Just a letter from the boyfriend." Hazel shrugged her shoulders. "Nothing hot, not even warm. Go ahead and read it." Not interested in what it says, but it might be smart to develop it, envelope and all, for invisible ink and whatnot. He did so, deeming it a worthwhile expenditure of time. He already knew what the hidden message was, but no one not of the patrol should know that no transmission of intelligence, however coded or garbled or disguised or by whatever means sent, could be concealed from any wearer of Arisia's lens. "Listen, Hazel," Kinnison said, holding up the now slightly stained paper. 362. That's you, I suppose, and you're the squad leader. Men mentioned previously being investigated. Stop. Assign 398. That must be you, Jane. And make acquaintance. Stop. If no further instructions received by 1800 hours, liquidate immediately. Stop. Party 1. The blonde operative lost for the first time her brazen control. "Why, that code is unbreakable," she gasped. "Wrong again, gentle Ellis. Some of us are specialists." He directed a thought at Northrop. "This changes things slightly, Mace. I was going to turn them loose, but now I don't know. Better we take it up with the boss, don't you think?" "Positively." Samms was called and considered the matter for approximately 1 minute. "Your first idea was right, Jack. Let them go. The message may be helpful and informative, but the women would not. They know nothing. Congratulations, boys, on the complete success of Operation Red Herring." "Ouch," Jack grimaced mentally to his partner after the First Lensman had cut off. "They know enough to be in on bumping you and me off, but that ain't important," says he. "And it ain't, bub," Northrop grinned back. "Moderately so, maybe, if they had got us, but not at all so now they can't. The Lensmen have landed, and the situation is well in hand. It is written. Salah." "Check. Let's wrap it up." Jack turned to the blonde. "Come on, Hazel. Out. Number 4 lifeboat. Do you want to come peaceably, or shall I work on your neck again?" "You could think of other places that would be more fun." She got up and stared directly into his eyes, her lip curling. "That is, if you were a man instead of a sublimated Boy Scout." Kinnison, without a word, wheeled and unlocked a door. Hazel swaggered forward, but the taller girl hung back. "Are you sure there's air, and they'll pick us up? Maybe they're going to make us breathe space." "Huh? They haven't got the guts," Hazel sneered. "Come on, Jane. Number 4, you said, darling?" She led the way. Kinnison opened the portal. Jane hurried aboard, but Hazel paused and held out her arms. "Aren't you even going to kiss Mama goodbye, baby boy?" she taunted. "Better not waste much more time. We blow this boat, sealed or open, in 15 seconds. By what effort Kinnison held his voice level and expressionless, he hoped the wench would never know. She looked at him, started to say something, looked again. She had gone just about as far as it was safe to go. She stepped into the boat and reached for the lever, and as the valve was swinging smoothly shut, the men heard a tinkling laugh, reminiscent of icicles breaking against steel bells. "Hell's brazen hinges!" Kinnison wiped his forehead as the lifeboat shot away. Hazel was something brand new to him, a phenomenon with which none of his education, training, or experience had equipped him to cope. "I've heard about the guy who got hold of a tiger by the tail, but—" His thought expired on a wondering, confused note. "Yeah," Northrop was in no better case. "We won, technically, I guess. Or did we? That was a god-awful drubbing we took, mister. Well, we got away alive anyway. We'll tell Parker his dope is correct to the proverbial 20 decimals. And now that we've escaped, let's call Spud and see how things came out." And Costigan Jones assured them that everything had come out very well indeed. The shipment of thionite had been followed without any difficulty at all, from the spaceship clear through to Jones' own office, and it exposed now in Department Q's own safe, under Jones' personal watch and ward. The pressure had lightened tremendously, just as Kinnison and Northrop had thought it would, when they set up their diversion. Costigan listened impassively to the whole story. "Now, should I have shot her or not?" Jack demanded. "Not whether I could have or not. I couldn't. But should I have, Spud?" "I don't know." Costigan thought for minutes. "I don't think so. No, not in cold blood. I couldn't have either, and wouldn't if I could. It wouldn't be worth it. Somebody will shoot her some day, but not one of us, unless, of course, it's in a fight." "Thanks, Bud. That makes me feel better. Off." Costigan Jones' desk was already clear, since there was little or no paperwork connected with his position in Department Q. Hence his preparations for departure were few and simple. He merely opened the safe, stuck the package into his pocket, closed and locked the safe, and took a company ground car to the spaceport. Nor was there any more formality about his leaving the planet. Arisian had, of course, a customs frontier of sorts, but since Uranium Inc. owned Arisian in fee simple, its customs paid no attention whatever to company ships or to low-number, gold-badge company men. Nor did Jones need ticket, passport, or visa. Company men rode company ships to and from company plants, wherever situated, without let or hindrance. Thus, wearing the aura of power of his new position, and gold badge number 38, George W. Jones was whisked out to the uranium ship and was shown to his cabin. Nor was it surprising that the trip from Arisian to Earth was completely without incident. This was an ordinary freighter, hauling uranium on a routine flight. Her cargo was valuable, of course, the sine qua non of interstellar trade, but in no sense precious. Not pirate bait by any means. And only 2 men knew that this flight was in any whit different from the one which had preceded it or the one which would follow it. If this ship was escorted or guarded, the fact was not apparent, and no patrol vessel came nearer to it than 4 detets. Virgil Samms and Roderick Kinnison saw to that. The voyage, however, was not tedious. Jones was busy every minute. In fact, there were scarcely minutes enough in which to assimilate the material which Isaacson had given him, the layouts, flow sheets, and organization charts of Works Number 18 on Tellus. And upon arrival at the private spaceport, which was an integral part of Works Number 18, Jones was not surprised. He knew more now than he had known a few weeks before, and infinitely more than the man on the street, to learn that the customs men of this particular North American port of entry were just as complacent as were those of Arisian. They did not bother even to count the boxes, to say nothing of inspecting them. They stamped the ship's papers without either reading or checking them. They made a perfunctory search, it is true, of crewmen and quarters, but a low number of gold badge was still a magic talisman. Unquestioned, sacrosanct, he and his baggage were escorted to the ground car first in line. "Administration building," Jones Costigan told the hacker, and that was that. End of Chapter 15. Chapter 16 of First Lensman by E. Doc Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. First Lensman, Chapter 16. It has been said that the basic drive of the Eddorians was a lust for power, a thought which should be elucidated and perhaps slightly modified. Their warrings, their strifes, their internecine intrigues and connivings were inevitable because of the tremendousness and capability, and the limitations, of their minds. Not enough could occur upon any one planet to keep such minds as theirs even partially occupied, and unlike the Arisians, they could not satiate themselves in a static philosophical study of the infinite possibilities of the cosmic all. They had to be doing something, or better yet, making other and lesser beings do things to make the physical universe conform to their idea of what a universe should be. Their first care was to set up the various echelons of control, The second echelon, immediately below the masters, was of course the most important, and after a survey of both galaxies, they decided to give this high honor to the Plurans. Plur, as is now well known, was a planet of a sun so variable that all Pluran life had to undergo radical cyclical changes in physical form in order to live through the tremendous climatic charges involved in its every year. Physical form, however, meant nothing to the Eddorians. Since no other planet even remotely like theirs existed in this, our normal plenum, physiques like theirs would be impossible, and the Pluran mentality left very little to be desired. In the third echelon there were many different races, among which the frigid-blooded, poison-breathing Ike were perhaps the most efficient and most callous. And in the fourth there were millions upon millions of entities representing thousands upon thousands of widely variant races. Thus, at the pinpoint in history represented by the time of Virgil Samms and Roderick Kinnison, and Eddorians were busy, and if such a word can be used, happy. Garlane of Eddor, second in authority only to the All-Highest, his ultimate supremacy himself, paid little attention to any one planet or to any one race. Even such a mind as his, when directing the affairs of 20 million, and then 60 million, and then 100 million worlds, can do so only in broad and not in fine. And thus the reports which were now flooding into Garlane in a constantly increasing stream concerned classes and groups of worlds and solar systems and galactic regions. A planet might perhaps be mentioned as representative of a class, but no individual entity lower than a Pluran was named or discussed. Garlane analyzed these tremendous reports, collated, digested, compared, and reconciled them, determined trends and tendencies, and most probable results. Garlane issued orders, the carrying out of which would make an entire galactic region fit more and ever more exactly into the great plan. But, as has been pointed out, there was one flaw inherent in the Bosconian system. Underlings, then as now, were prone to gloss over their own mistakes, to cover up their own incompetences. Thus, since he had no reason to inquire specifically, Garlane did not know that anything whatever had gone amiss on Sol III, the pestiferous planet which had formerly caused him more trouble than all the rest of his worlds combined. After the fact, it is easy to say that he should have continued his personal supervision of Earth, but can that view be defended? Egotistical, self-confident, arrogant, Garlane knew that he had finally whipped Tellus into line. It was the same now as any other planet of its class. And even had he thought it worth the while to make such a glaring exception, would not the fused elders of Arisia have intervened? Be those things as they may, Garlane did not know that the newborn Galactic Patrol had been successful in defending Triplanetary's Hill against the Black Fleet. Nor did the Pluran Assistant Director in charge, nor did any member of that dreadful group of Ike, which was even then calling itself the Council of Boscone. The highest-ranking Bosconian, who knew of the fiasco, calmly confident of his own ability, had not considered this minor reverse of sufficient importance to report it to his immediate superior. He had already taken steps to correct the condition. In fact, as matters now stood, the thing was more fortunate than otherwise, in that it would lull the patrol into believing themselves in a position of superiority, a belief which would, at election time, prove fatal. This being, human to the limit of classification except for a faint but unmistakable blue coloration, had been closeted with Senator Morgan for a matter of 2 hours. "In the matters covered, your reports have been complete and conclusive," the visitor said finally. "But you have not reported on the lens." "Purposely. We are investigating it, but any report based upon our present knowledge would be partial and inconclusive." "I see. Commendable enough, usually. News of this phenomenon has, however, gone farther and higher than you think, and I have been ordered to take cognizance of it, to decide whether or not to handle it myself." "I am thoroughly capable of—" "I will decide that, not you." Morgan subsided. "A partial report is therefore in order. Go ahead." "According to the procedure submitted and approved, a lensman was taken alive. Since the lens has telepathic properties, and hence is presumably operative at great distances, the operation was carried out in the shortest possible time. The lens, immediately upon removal from the patrolman's arm, ceased to radiate, and the operative who held the thing died. It was then applied by force to 4 other men, workers these of no importance. All 4 died, thus obviating all possibility of coincidence. An attempt was made to analyze a fragment of the active material without success. It seemed to be completely inert. Neither was it affected by electrical discharges or by subatomic bombardment, nor by any temperatures available. Meanwhile, the man was of course being questioned, under truth drug and beams. His mind denied any knowledge of the nature of the lens, a thing which I am rather inclined to believe. His mind adhered to the belief that he obtained the lens upon the planet Arisia. I am offering for your consideration my opinion that the high-ranking officers of the patrol are using hypnotism to conceal the real source of the lens. Your opinion is accepted for consideration. The man died during examination. 2 minutes after his death, his lens disappeared. Disappeared? What do you mean? Flew away? Vanished? Was stolen? Disintegrated? Or what? No, more like evaporation or sublimation, except that there was no gradual diminution in volume, and there was no detectable residue, either solid, liquid, or gaseous. The platinum alloy bracelet remained intact. And then? The patrol attacked in force, and our expedition was destroyed. You are sure of these observational facts? I have the detailed records. Would you like to see them? Send them to my office. I hereby relieve you of all responsibility in the matter of the lens. In fact, even I may decide to refer it to a higher echelon. Have you any other material, not necessarily facts, which may have bearing? None, Morgan replied. And it was just as well for Virgilia Samms' continued well-being that the senator did not think it worthwhile to mention the traceless disappearance of his #1 secretary and a few members of a certain unsavory gang. To his way of thinking, the lens was not involved, except perhaps very incidentally. Herkimer, in spite of advice and orders, had probably got rough with the girl, and Sam's mob had rubbed him out. Served him right. I have no criticism of any phase of your work. You are doing a particularly nice job on thionite. You are, of course, observing all specified precautions as to key personnel? Certainly. Thorough testing and unremitting watchfulness. Our Mr. Isaacson is about to promote a man who has proved very satisfactory. Keep them that way. Goodbye. The visitor strode out. Morgan reached for a switch, then drew his hand back. No, he would like to sit in on the forthcoming interview, but he did not have the time. He had tested Olmsted repeatedly and personally. He knew what the man was. It was Isaacson's department. Let Isaacson handle it. He himself must work full-time at the job which only he could handle. The nationalist must and would win this forthcoming election. And in the office of the President of Interstellar Spaceways, Isaacson got up and shook hands with George Olmsted. I called you in for 2 reasons. First, in reply to your message that you were ready for a bigger job. What makes you think that any such are available? Do I need to answer that? Perhaps not. No. The magnate smiled quietly. Morgan was right. This man could not be accused of being dumb. There is such a job. You are ready for it, and you have your successor trained in the work of harvesting. Second, why did you cut down, instead of increasing as ordered, the weight of broadleaf per trip? This, Olmsted, is really serious. I explained why. It would have been more serious the other way. Didn't you believe I knew what I was talking about? Your reasoning may have been distorted in transmittal. I want it straight from you. Very well. It isn't smart to be greedy. There's a point at which something that has been merely a nuisance becomes a thing that has to be wiped out. Since I didn't want to be in that ferry when the patrol blows it out of the ether, I cut down the take, and I advise you to keep it down. What you're getting now is a lot more than you ever got before, and a hell of a lot more than none at all. Think it over." "I see. Upon what basis did you arrive at the figure you established?" "Pure guesswork, nothing else. I guess that about 300% of the previous average per month ought to satisfy anybody who wasn't too greedy to have good sense, and that more than that would ring a loud, clear bell right where we don't want any noise made. So I cut it down to 3 and advised Ferdy either to keep it at 3 or quit while he was still all in one piece." "You exceeded your authority. You were insubordinate. But it wouldn't surprise me if you were right. You are certainly right in principle, and the poundage can be determined by statistical and psychological analysis. But in the meantime, there is tremendous pressure for increased production." "I know it. Pressure be damned. My dear cousin Virgil is, as you already know, a crackpot. He is a visionary, idealistic, full of sweet and beautiful concepts of what the universe would be like if there weren't so many people like you and me in it. But don't ever make the mistake of writing him off as anybody's fool. And you know, probably better than I do, what Rod Kinnison is like. If I were you, I'd tell whoever is doing the screaming to shut their damn mouths before they get their teeth kicked down their throats." "I'm very much inclined to take your advice. And now as to this proposed promotion. You are, of course, familiar in a general way with our operation at Northport?" "I could scarcely help knowing something about the biggest uranium works on Earth. However, I am not well enough qualified in detail to make a good technical executive. Nor is it necessary. Our thought is to make you a key man in a new and increasingly important branch of the business, known as Department Q. It is concerned neither with production nor with uranium." "Q as in quiet, eh? I'm listening with both ears. What duties would be connected with this, position?" "What would I really do?" Two pairs of hard eyes locked and held, staring yieldlessly into each other's depths. "You would not be unduly surprised to learn that substances other than uranium occasionally reach Northport?" "Not too surprised, no," Olmsted replied dryly. "What would I do with it?" "We need not go into that here or now. I offer you the position." "I accept it." "Very well. I will take you to Northport, and we will continue our talk en route." And in a spy-ray-proof, soundproof compartment of a Spaceway's own stratoliner, they did so. "Just for my information, Mr. Isaacson, how many predecessors have I had on this particular job, and what happened to them? The patrol get them?" "2, no. We have not been able to find any evidence that the Samms crowd has any suspicion of us. Both were too small for the job. Neither could handle personnel. One got funny ideas. The other couldn't stand the strain. If you don't get funny ideas and don't crack up, you will make out in a big, and I mean really big, way. If I do either, I'll be more than somewhat surprised." Olmsted's features set themselves into a mirthless, uncompromising, somehow bitter grin. "So will I," Isaacson agreed. He knew what this man was, and just how case-hardened he was. He knew that he had fought Morgan himself to a scoreless tie after twisting Herkimer, and he was no soft touch, into a pretzel in nothing flat. At the thought of the secretary, so recently and so mysteriously vanished, the magnate's mind left for a moment the matter in hand. What was at the bottom of that affair, the lens or the woman, or both? If he were in Morgan's shoes, but he wasn't. He had enough grief of his own, without worrying about any of Morgan's stinkeroos. He studied Olmsted's inscrutable, subtly sneering smile, and knew that he had made a wise decision. "I gather that I'm going to be one of the main links in the primary chain of deliveries. What's the technique, and how do I cover up?" "Technique first. You go fishing. You are an expert at that, I believe?" "You might say so. I won't have to do any faking there." "Some weekend soon, and every weekend later on, we hope, you will indulge in your favorite sport at some lake or other. You will take the customary solid and liquid refreshments along in a lunchbox. When you have finished eating, you will toss the lunchbox overboard." "That's all?" "That's all." "The lunchbox, then, will be slightly special?" "More or less, although it will look ordinary enough. Now, as to the cover-up, how would Director of Research sound?" "I don't know. Depends on what the researchers are doing. Before I became an engineer, I was a pure scientist of sorts, but that was quite a while ago, and I was never a specialist." "That is one reason why I think you will do. We have plenty of specialists. Too many, I often think. They dash off in all directions, without rhyme or reason. What we want is a man with enough scientific training to know in general what is going on, but what we will need mostly is a hard common sense and enough ability, mental force you might call it, to hold the specialists down to earth and make them pull together. If you can do it, and if I didn't think you could, I wouldn't be talking to you, the whole force will know that you are earning your pay, just as we could not hide the fact that your two predecessors weren't." "Put that way, it sounds good. I wouldn't wonder if I could handle it." The conversation went on, but the rest of it is of little importance here. The plane landed. Isaacson introduced the new director of research to Works Manager Rand, who in turn introduced him to a few of his scientists, and to the svelte and spectacular redhead who was to be his private secretary. It was clear from the first that the research department was not going to be an easy one to manage. The top men were defiant, the middle ranks were sullen, the smaller fry were apprehensive as well as sullen. The secretary flaunted chips on both shapely shoulders. Men and women alike expected the application of the old wheeze, "A new broom sweeps clean," for the third time in scarcely twice that many months, and they were defying him to do his worst. Wherefore, they were very much surprised when the new boss did nothing whatever for 2 solid weeks, except read reports and get acquainted with his department. "How do you like your new boss, May?" another secretary asked during a break. "Oh, not too bad, I guess." May's tone was full of reservations. "He's quiet, sort of reserved. No passes or anything like that. It'd be funny if I finally got a boss that had something on the ball, wouldn't it? But you know what, Molly?" The redhead giggled suddenly. "I had a camera fiend first, you know, with 1,000,000 credits worth of stereo cams and such stuff, and then a golf nut. I wonder what this Dr. Olmsted does with his spare cash." "You'll find out, dearie, no doubt." Molly's tone gave the words a meaning slightly different to the semantic one of their arrangement. "I intend to, Molly. I fully intend to." May's meaning, too, was not expressed exactly by the sequence of words used. "It must be tough, a boss's life, having to sit at a desk or be in conference 6 or 7 hours a day, when he isn't playing around somewhere, for a measly 1,000 credits or so a month. How do they get that way?" "You said it, May. You really said it. But we'll get ours, huh?" Time went on. George Olmsted studied reports and more reports. He read one and reread it, frowning. He compared it minutely with another, then sent red-headed May to hunt up one which had been turned in a couple of weeks before. He took them home that evening, and in the morning he punched 3 buttons. 3 stiffly polite young men obeyed his summons. "Good morning, Dr. Olmsted." "Morning, boys. I'm not up on the fundamental theory of any of these 3 reports, but if you combine this and this and this," indicating heavily penciled sections of the 3 documents, "would you or would you not be able to work out a process that would do away with about 3/4 of the final purification and separation processes?" They did not know. It had not been the business of any one of them, or of all of them collectively, to find out. "I'm making it your business as of now. Drop whatever you're doing, put your heads together, and find out. Theory first, then a small-scale laboratory experiment, then come back here on the double." "Yes, sir." And in a few days they were back. "Does it work?" "In theory it should, sir, and on a laboratory scale it does." The 3 young men were, if possible, even stiffer than before. It was not the first time, nor would it be the last, that a director of research would seize credit for work which he was not capable of doing. "Good. Miss Reed, get me Rand." Rand, Olmsted, 3 of my boys have just hatched out something that may be worth quite a few million credits a year to us. Me? Hell no. Talk to them. I can't understand any one of the 3 parts of it, to say nothing of inventing it. I want you to give them a Class AAA priority on the pilot plant as of right now. If they can develop it, and I'm betting they can, I'm going to put their pictures in the Northrop News and give them a couple of thousand credits apiece and a couple of weeks' vacation to spend it in. Yeah, I'll send them in. He turned to the flabbergasted 3. Take your dope into Rand now. Show him what you've got, then tear into that pilot plant. And a little later, Molly and May again met in the powder room. So your new boss is a fisherman, Molly snickered. And they say he paid over 200 credits for a reel. You were right, May. A boss's life must be mighty hard to take. And he sits around more and does less, they say, than any other exec in the plant. Who says so? The dirty, sneaking liars. The redhead blazed, completely unaware that she had reversed her former position. And even if it was so, which it isn't, he can do more work sitting perfectly still than any other boss in the whole works can do tearing around at 40 parsecs a minute. So there. George Olmsted was earning his salary. His position was fully consolidated when, a few days later, a tremor of excitement ran through the research department. Heads up, everybody! Mr. Isaacson himself is coming here! What for, I wonder? You don't suppose he's going to take the old man away from us already, do you? He went through, for the first time, the entire department. He observed minutely, and he understood what he saw. Olmsted led the big boss into his private office and flipped the switch which supposedly rendered that sanctum proof against any and all forms of spying, eavesdropping, intrusion, and communication. It did not, however, close the deeper, subtler channels which the lensman used. Good work, George. So damned good that I'm going to have to take you out of Department Q entirely and make you works manager of our new plant on Vigia. Have you got a man you can break in to take your place here? Including Department Q? No. Although Olmsted did not show it, he was disappointed at hearing the word Vigia. He had been aiming much higher than that, at the secret planet of the Bosconian armed forces no less, but there might still be enough time to win a transfer there. Excluding. I've got another good man here now for that, Jones. Not heavy enough, though, for Vigia. In that case, yes, Dr. Whitworth, one of the boys who worked out the new process. It'll take a little time, though. 3 weeks minimum. 3 weeks it is. Today's Friday. You've got things in shape, haven't you, so that you can take the weekend off? I was figuring on it. I'm not going where I thought I was, though, I imagine. Probably not. Lake Chesuncook, on Route 273. Rough country, and the hotel is something less than fourth rate, but the fishing can't be beat. I'm glad of that. When I fish, I like to catch something. It would smell if you didn't. They stock lunchboxes in the cafeteria, you know. Have your girl get you one, full of sandwiches and stuff. Start early this afternoon, as soon as you can after I leave. Be sure and see Jones with your lunchbox before you leave. Goodbye. Miss Reed, please send Whitworth in. Then skip down to the cafeteria and get me a lunchbox, sandwiches and a thermos of coffee. Provender suitable for a wet and hungry fisherman. Yes, sir. There were no chips now. The redhead's boss was the top ace of the whole plant. Hi, Ned. Take the throne. Olmsted waved his hand at the now vacant chair behind the big desk. Hold it down till I get back. Monday, maybe. Going fishing, huh? Gone was all trace of stiffness, of reserve, of unfriendliness. You big lucky stiff. Well, my brilliant young squirt, maybe you'll get old and fat enough to go fishing yourself some day. Who knows? Bye. Lunchbox in hand and encumbered with tackle, Olmsted walked blithely along the corridor to the office of Assistant Works Manager Jones. While he had not known just what to expect, he was not surprised to see a lunchbox exactly like his own upon the side table. He placed his box beside it. Hi, Olmsted. By no slightest flicker of expression did either lensman step out of character. "Shoving off early?" "Yeah, dropped by to let the head office know I won't be back till Monday." "Okay, so am I, but more speed for me. Chem Quasabamtikuk Lake." "Do you pronounce that or sneeze it? But have fun, my boy. I'm combining business with pleasure, though. Breaking in Whitworth on my job. That Fairplay thing is going to break in about an hour, and it'll scare the pants off of him. But it'll keep until Monday anyway, and if he handles it right, he's just about in." Jones grinned. "A bit brutal, perhaps, but a sure way to find out. Bye." "So long." Olmsted strolled out, nonchalantly picking up the wrong lunchbox on the way, and left the building. He ordered his Dillingham and tossed the lunchbox aboard as carelessly as though it did not contain an unknown number of millions of credits worth of clear quill, uncut thionite. "I hope you have a nice weekend, sir," the yardman said as he helped stow baggage and tackle. "Thanks, Otto. I'll bring you a couple of fish Monday, if I catch that many." And it should be said in passing that he brought them. Lensmen keep their promises, under whatever circumstances or however lightly given. It being mid-afternoon of Friday, the traffic was already heavy. Northport was not a metropolis, of course, but on the other hand, it did not have the metropolitan, multi-tiered, one-way, non-intersecting streets. But Olmsted was in no hurry. He inched his spectacular mount. It was a violently iridescent chrome green in color, with highly polished chromium gingerbread wherever there was any excuse for gingerbread to be, across the city and into the northbound side of the superhighway. Even then, he did not hurry. He wanted to hit the inspection station at the edge of the preserve at dusk. 90 miles an hour would do it. He worked his way into the 90-mile lane and became motionless relative to the other vehicles on the strip. It was a peculiar sensation. It seemed as though the cars themselves were stationary, with the pavement flowing backward beneath them. There was no passing, no weaving, no cutting in and out. Only occasionally would the formation be broken as a car would shift almost imperceptibly to one side or the other, speeding up or slowing down to match the assigned speed of the neighboring way. The afternoon was bright and clear, neither too hot nor too cold. Olmsted enjoyed his drive thoroughly and arrived at the turnoff right on schedule. Leaving the wide, smooth way, he slowed down abruptly. Even a Dillingham super sporter could not make speed on the narrow, rough, and hilly road to Chesuncook Lake. At dusk he reached the post. Instead of stopping on the pavement, he pulled off the road, got out, stretched hugely, and took a few drum-major steps to take the kinks out of his legs. "A lot of road, eh?" the smartly uniformed trooper remarked. "No guns?" "No guns." Olmsted opened up for inspection. "From Northport." "Funny, isn't it, how hard it is to stop, even when you aren't in any particular hurry? Guess I'll eat now. Join me in a sandwich and some hot coffee or a cold lemon sour or cherry soda?" "I've got my own supper, thanks. I was just about to eat." "But you did say a cold lemon sour?" "Uh-huh, ice cold, 0 degrees centigrade." "I will join you in that case. Thanks." Olmsted opened a frost-lined compartment, took out 2 half-liter bottles, placed them and his open lunchbox invitingly on the low stone wall. Quite a zipper you got there, mister." The trooper gazed admiringly at the luxurious, 2-wheeled monster, listened appreciatively to its almost inaudible hum. "I've heard about these new supers, but that is the first one I ever saw. Nice. All the comforts of home, eh?" "Just about. Sure you won't help me clean up on those sandwiches before they get stale?" Seated on the wall, the 2 men ate and talked. If that trooper had known what was in the box beside his leg, he probably would have fallen over backward. But how was he even to suspect? There was nothing crass or rough or coarse about any of the work of any of Boscone's high-level operators. Olmsted drove on to the lake and took up his reservation at the ramshackle hotel. He slept, and bright and early the next morning he was up and fishing, and this part of the performance he really enjoyed. He knew his stuff, and the fish were there, big, wary, and game. He loved it. At noon he ate, and quite openly and brazenly consigned the empty box to the watery deep. Even if he had not had so many fish to carry, he was not the type to lug a cheap lunchbox back to town. He fished joyously all afternoon, without getting quite the limit, and as the sun grazed the horizon, he started his putt-putt and skimmed back to the dock. The thing hadn't sent out any radiation yet, Northrop informed him tensely, but it certainly would, and when it did, they'd be ready. There were lensmen and patrolmen all over the place, thicker than hair on a dog. And George Olmsted, sighing wearily and yet blissfully anticipatory of one more day of enthralling sport, gathered up his equipment and his fish and strolled toward the hotel. End of Chapter 16. Chapter 17 of First Lensman by E. Doc Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. First Lensman. Chapter 17. 40,000 miles from Earth's center, the Chicago loafed along a circular arc, inert at a mere 10,000 miles an hour, a speed which, and not by accident, kept her practically stationary above a certain point on the planet's surface. Nor was it by chance that both Virgil Samms and Roderick Kinnison were aboard, and a dozen or so other craft, cruisers and such, whose officers were out to put space-time in their logs, were flitting aimlessly about, but never very far away from the flagship. And farther out, well out, a cordon of diesel-powered detector ships swept space to the full limit of their prodigious reach. The navigating officers of those vessels knew to a nicety the place and course of every ship lawfully in the ether, and the appearance of even one unscheduled trace would set in motion a long succession of carefully planned events. And far below, grazing atmosphere, never very far from the direct line between the Chicago and Earth's core, floated a palatial pleasure yacht. And this craft carried not one lensman or two, but 8. 2 of whom kept their eyes fixed upon their observation plates. They were watching a lunchbox resting upon the bottom of a lake. "Hasn't it radiated yet?" Roderick Kinnison demanded. "Or been approached, or moved?" "Not yet," Lyman Cleveland replied crisply. "Neither Northrop's rig nor mine has shown any sign of activity." He did not amplify the statement, nor was there need. Mason Northrop was a master electronicist. Cleveland was perhaps the world's greatest living expert. Neither of them had detected radiation. Ergo, none existed. Equally certainly, the box had not moved or been moved or approached. "No change, Rod," Dr. Frederick Rodebush lensed the assured thought. 6 of us have been watching the plates in 5-minute shifts. A few minutes later, however, "Here is a thought which may be of interest," Dull Knowlton the Venerian announced, spraying himself with a couple pints of water. "It is natural enough, of course, for any Venerian to be in or on any water he can reach. I would enjoy very much being on or in that lake myself. But it may not be entirely by coincidence that one particular Venerian, Osman, is visiting this particular lake at this particular time." "What?" 9 lensmen yelled the thought practically as one. "Precisely. Osman." It was a measure of the Venerian lensman's concern that he used only 2 words instead of 20 or 30. "In the red boat with the yellow sail." "Do you see any detector rigs?" Samms asked. "He wouldn't need any," Dull Knowlton put in. "He will be able to see it. Or, if a little choline had been rubbed on it which no Tellurian could have noticed, any Venerian could smell it from one end of that lake to the other." "True. I didn't think of that. It may not have a transmitter after all." "Maybe not, but keep on listening anyway," the port admiral ordered. "Bend a plate on Osman, and a couple more on the rest of the boats. But Osman is clean, you say, Jack? Not even a spy ray block?" "He couldn't have a block, Dad. It'd give too much away here on our home grounds. Like on Eridan, where their ops could wear anything they could lift, but we had to go naked." He flinched mentally as he recalled his encounter with Hazel the Hellcat, and Northrop flinched with him. "That's right, Rod," Olmsted in his boat below agreed, and Conway Costigan in his room in Northport concurred. The top-drawer operatives of the enemy depended for safety upon perfections of technique, not upon crude and dangerous mechanical devices. "Well, since you're all so sure of it, I'll buy it." And the waiting went on. Under the slight urge of the light and vagrant breeze, the red boat moved slowly across the water. A somnolent, lackadaisical youth, who very evidently cared nothing about where the boat went, sat in its stern, with his left arm draped loosely across the tiller. Nor was Osman any more concerned. His only care, apparently, was to avoid interference with the fishermen. His underwater jaunts were long, even for a Venerian, and he entered and left the water as smoothly as only a Venerian or a seal could. However, he could have, and probably has got, a capsule spy ray detector, Jack offered presently. Or, since a Venerian can swallow anything 1 inch smaller than a kitchen stove, he could have a whole analyzing station stashed away in his stomach. Nobody's put a beam on him yet, have you? Nobody had. It might be smart not to. Watch him with scopes, and when he gets up close to the box, better pull your beams off of it. Dalnalton, I don't suppose it would be quite bright for you to go swimming down there too, would it? Very definitely not, which is why I am up here and dry. None of them would go near it. They waited, and finally Osman's purposeless wanderings brought him over the spot on the lake's bottom which was the target of so many Tellurian eyes. He gazed at the discarded lunchbox as incuriously as he had looked at so many other sunken objects, and swam over it as casually, and only the ultra cameras caught what he actually did. He swam serenely on. "The box is still there," the spy ray men reported, "but the package is gone." "Good," Kinnison exclaimed. "Can you scopist see it on him?" 10 to 1 they can't, Jack said. "He swallowed it. I expected him to swallow it, box and all." "We can't see it, sir. He must have swallowed it." "Make sure." "Yes, sir. He's back on the boat now, and we've shot him from all angles. He's clean. Nothing outside." "Perfect. That means he isn't figuring on slipping it to somebody else in a crowd. This will be an ordinary job of shadowing from here on in, so I'll put in the umbrella." The detector ships were recalled. The Chicago and the various other ships of war returned to their various bases. The pleasure craft floated away. But, on the other hand, there were bursts of activity throughout the forest for a mile or so back from the shores of the lake. Camps were struck. Hiking parties decided that they had hiked enough and began to retrace their steps. Lithe young men, who had been doing this and that, stopped doing it and headed for the nearest trails. For Kinnison père had erred slightly in saying that the rest of the enterprise was to be an ordinary job of shadowing. No ordinary job would do. With the game this nearly in the bag, it must be made absolutely certain that no suspicion was aroused, and yet Samms had to have facts. Sharp, hard, clear facts. Facts so self-evidently facts that no intelligence above idiot grade could possibly mistake them for anything but facts. Wherefore Osman the Venerian was not alone thenceforth. From lake to hotel, from hotel to car, along the roads, into and out of train and plane, clear to an ordinary enough-looking building in an ordinary business section of New York, he was never alone. Where the traveling population was light, the patrol operatives were few and did not crowd the Venerian too nearly. Where dense, as in a metropolitan station, they ringed him 3 deep. He reached his destination, which was, of course, spy-ray-proofed, late Sunday night. He went in, remained briefly, came out. "Shall we spy-ray him, Virg? Follow him, or what?" "No spy-rays. Follow him. Cover him like a blanket. At the usual time, give him the usual spy-ray going over, but not until then. This time, make it thorough. Make certain that he hasn't got it on him, or in or around his house." "There'll be nothing doing here tonight, will there?" "No, it would be too noticeable. So you, Fred, and Lyman take the first trick. The rest of us will get some sleep." When the building opened Monday morning, the Lensmen were back, with dozens of others, including Konobos of Mars. There were also present or nearby literally hundreds of the shrewdest, most capable detectives of Earth. "So this is their headquarters, one of them at least," the Martian thought, studying the trickle of people entering and leaving the building. "It is as we thought, Dahl. Why we could never find it. Why we could never trace any wholesaler backward. None of us has ever seen any of these persons before. Complete change of personnel per operation. Probably interplanetary. Long periods of quiescence. Check? Check. But we have them now." "Just like that, huh?" Jack Kinnison jibed, and from his viewpoint his idea was the more valid, for the wholesalers were very clever operators indeed. From the more professional viewpoint of Konobos and Dahl Knowlton, however, who had fought a steadily losing battle so long, the task was not too difficult. Their forces were beautifully organized and synchronized. They were present in such overwhelming numbers that tails could be changed every 15 seconds, long before anybody, however suspicious, could begin to suspect any one shadow. Nor was it necessary for the tails to signal each other, however inconspicuously, or to indicate any suspect at changeover time. Len's thoughts directed every move without confusion or error. And there were tiny cameras with tremendous protuberant lenses, the long eyes capable of taking wire-sharp close-ups from 500 feet, and other devices and apparatus and equipment too numerous to mention here. Thus the wholesalers were traced and their transactions with the retail peddlers were recorded, and from that point on even Jack Kinnison had to admit that the sailing was clear. The small fry were not smart, and their customers were even less so. None had screens or detectors or other apparatus. Their every transaction could be and was recorded from a distance of many miles by the ultra instruments of the patrol. And not only the transactions. Clearly, unmistakably, the purchaser was followed from buying to sniffing. Nor was the time intervening very long. Thionite, then as now, was bought at retail only to use, and the whole ghastly thing went down on tape and film. The gasping, hysterical appeal, the exchange of currency for drug, the headlong rush to a place of solitude, the rigid muscle lock and the horribly ecstatic transports, the shaken, soul-searing recovery or the entranced death. It all went on record. It was sickening to have to record such things. More than one observer did sicken, in fact, and had to be relieved. But Virgil Samms had to have concrete, positive, irrefutable evidence. He got it. Any possible jury, upon seeing that evidence, would know it to be the truth. No possible jury, after seeing that evidence, could bring in any verdict other than guilty. Oddly enough, Jack Kinnison was the only casualty of that long and hectic day. A man, later proved to be a middle-sized potentate of the underworld, who was not even under suspicion at the time, for some reason or other got the idea that Jack was after him. The lensman had, perhaps, allowed some part of his long eye to show. A fast and efficient long-range telephoto lens is a devilishly awkward thing to conceal. At any rate, the racketeer sent out a call for help, just in case his bodyguards would not be enough, and in the meantime his personal attendants rallied enthusiastically around. They had two objects in view. One, to pass a knife expeditiously and quietly through the young Kinnison's throat from ear to ear, and two, to tear the long eye apart and subject a few square inches of supersensitive emotion to the bright light of day. And if the big shot had known that the photographer was not alone, that the big, hulking bruiser a few feet away was also a bull, they might have succeeded. Two of the four hoods reached Jack just fractionally ahead of the other two, one to seize the camera, the other to swing the knife. But Jack Kinnison was fast of brain and nerve and muscle. He saw them coming. In 3 flashing motions, he bent the barrel of the telephoto into a neat arc around the side of the first man's head, ducked frantically under the fiercely driven knife, and drove the toe of his boot into the spot upon which prize-fighters like to have their rapid punches land. Both of those attackers lost interest promptly. One of them lost interest permanently. For a telephoto lens in barrel is heavy, very rigid, and very, very hard. While battling Jack was still off balance, the other two guards arrived, but so did Mason Northrop. Mace was not quite as fast as Jack was, but, as has been pointed out, he was bigger and much stronger. When he hit a man with either hand, that man dropped. It was the same as being on the receiving end of the blow of a 20-pound hammer falling through a distance of 97 1/2 feet. The lensman had, of course, also yelled for help, and it took only a split second for a patrol speedster to travel from any given point to any other in the same county. It took no time at all for that speedster to fill a couple of square blocks with patterns of force through which neither bullets nor beams could be driven. Therefore, the battle ended as suddenly as it began, before more thugs with their automatics and portables could reach the scene. Kinnison Fields cursed and damned fulminantly the edict which had forbidden arms that day, and swore that he would never get out of bed again without strapping on at least 2 blasters, but he had to admit finally that he had nothing to squawk about. Kinnison Père explained quite patiently, for him, that all he had got out of the little fracas was a split lip, that young Northrop's hair wasn't even mussed, and that if everybody had been packing guns, some scatter-brained young damn fool like him would have started blasting and blown everything higher than up, would have spoiled Sam's whole operation, maybe beyond repair. Now, would he please quit bellyaching and get the hell out? He got. "That buttons thionite up, don't you think?" Rod Kinnison asked. "And the lawyers will have plenty of time to get the case licked into shape and lined up for trial." "Yes and no." Samms frowned in thought. "The evidence is complete, from original producer to ultimate consumer, but our best guess is that it will take years to get the really important offenders behind bars." "Why? I thought you were giving them altogether too much time when you scheduled the blow-off for 3 weeks ahead of election." "Because the drug racket is only a small part of it. We're going to break the whole thing at once, you know, and Matisse covers a lot more ground. Murder, kidnapping, bribery, corruption, misfeasance, practically everything you can think of." "I know. What of it?" "Jurisdiction, among other things. With the president, over half of the Congress, much of the judiciary, and practically all of the political bosses and police chiefs of the continent under indictment at once, the legal problem becomes incredibly difficult. The Patrol's Department of Law has been working on it 24 hours a day, and the only thing they seem sure of is a long succession of bitterly contested points of law. There are no precedents whatever." "Precedents be damned! They're guilty and everybody knows it. We'll change the law so that—" "We will not," Samms interrupted sharply. "We want and we will have government by law, not by men. We have had too much of that already. Speed is not of the essence. Justice very definitely is." "Crusader Samms, now and forever. But I'll buy it, Virg. Now let's get back down to earth. Operation Zwilnik is all set. Matisse is going good. Zabrisca tied into Zwilnik. That leaves Operation Boscone, which is, I suppose, still getting nowhere fast." The First Lensman did not reply. It was, and both men knew it. The shrewdest, most capable and experienced operatives of the patrol had hit that wall with everything they had and had simply bounced. Low-level trials had found no point of contact, no angle of approach. Middle level, ditto. George Olmsted, working at the highest possible level, was morally certain that he had found a point of contact, but had not been able to do anything with it. "How about calling a council conference on it?" Kinnison asked finally. "Or Bergenholm, at least. Maybe he can get one of his hunches on it." "I have discussed it with them all, just as I have with you. No one had anything constructive to offer, except to go ahead with Bennett, as you are doing. The consensus is that the Bosconians know just as much about our military affairs as we know about theirs. No more." It would be too much to expect them to be dumb enough to figure us as dumb enough to depend only on our visible Grand Fleet after the warning they gave us at the Hill, Kinnison admitted. Yes, what worries me most is that they had a running start. Not enough to count, the Port Admiral declared. We can outproduce 'em and outfight 'em. Don't be over-optimistic. You can't deny them the possession of brains, ability, manpower, and resources at least equal to ours. I don't have to. Kinnison remained obstinately cheerful. Morale, my boy, is what counts. Manpower and tonnage and firepower are important, of course, but morale has won every war in history, and our morale right now is higher than a cat's back, higher than any time since John Paul Jones, and getting higher by the day. Yes? The question was monosyllabic, but potent. Yes. I mean just that. Yes. From what we know of their system, they can't have the morale we've got. Anything they can do, we can do more of and better. What you've got, Virg, is a bad case of ingrowing nerves. You've never been to Bennett, in spite of the number of times I've asked you to. I say take time right now and come along. It'll be good for what ails you. It will also be a very fine thing for Bennett and for the patrol. You'll find yourself no stranger there. You may have something there. I'll do it. Port Admiral and First Lensman went to Bennett, not in the Chicago or other super dreadnought, but in a two-man speedster. This was necessary because space travel, as far as that planet was concerned, was a strictly one-way affair except for Lensman. Only Lensman could leave Bennett under any circumstances or for any reason whatever. There was no outgoing mail, express, or freight. Even the war vessels of the fleet, while on practice maneuvers outside the bottle-tight envelope surrounding the system, were so screened that no unauthorized communication could possibly be made. In other words, Kinnison finished explaining, we slapped on everything anybody could think of, including Bergenholm and Rularion, and believe me, brother, that was a lot of stuff. But wouldn't the very fact of such rigid restrictions operate against morale? It is a truism of psychology that imprisonment, like everything else, is purely relative. Yeah, that's what I told Rularion, except I used simpler and rougher language. You know how sarcastic and superior he is, even when he's wrong? How I know? Well, when he's right, he's too damned insufferable for words. You'd have thought he was talking to the prize boob of a class of half-wits. As long as nobody on the planet knew that there was any such thing as space travel, or suspected that they were not the only form of intelligent life in the universe, it was all right. No such concept as being planet-bound could exist. They had all the room there was. But after they met us and digested all the implications, they would develop the collywobbles no end. This, of course, is an extreme simplification of the way the old coot poured it into me, but he came through with the solution, so I took it like a little man. What was the solution? It's a shame you were too busy to come in on it. You'll see when we land. But Virgil Samms was quick on the uptake. Even before they landed, he understood. When the speedster slowed down for atmosphere, he saw blazoned upon the clouds a welter of one many times repeated signal. As they came to ground, he saw that the same set of symbols was repeated, not only upon every available cloud, but also upon airships, captive balloons, streamers, roofs, and sides of buildings. Even in multicolored rocks and flower beds upon the ground itself. 20 Heres, Samms translated, and frowned in thought. A date of the Benetton year. Would it, by any chance, happen to coincide with our Tellurian November 14th of this present year? Bright boy, Kinnison applauded. I thought you'd get it, but not so fast. Yes, Election Day. I see. They know what is going on, then. Everything that counts. They know what we stand to win and lose. They've named it Liberation Day, and everything on the planet is building up to it in a grand crescendo. I was a little afraid of it at first, But if the screens are really tight, it won't make any difference how many people know it. And if they aren't, the beans would all be spilled anyway. And it really works. I get a bigger thrill every time I come here." "I can see where it might work." Bennett was a fully Tellurian world in mass, in atmosphere, and in climate. Her native peoples were human to the limit of classification, both physically and mentally. And First Lensman Samms, as he toured it with his friend, found a world aflame with a zeal and an ardor unknown to the blasé Earth since the days of the Crusades. The patrol's cleverest and shrewdest psychologists, by merely sticking to the truth, had done a marvelous job. Bennett knew that it was the arsenal and the navy yard of civilization, and it was proud of it. Its factories were humming as they had never hummed before. Every industry, every business, every farm was operating at 100% of capacity. Bennett was dotted and splattered with spaceports already built, and hundreds more were being rushed to completion. The already staggering number of ships of war operating out of those ports was being augmented every hour by more and ever more ultra-modern, ultra-fast, ultra-powerful shapes. It was an honor to help build those ships. It was a still greater one to help man them. Competitive examinations were being held constantly, nor were all or even most of the applicants native Bennettons. Samms did not have to ask where these young people were coming from. He knew. From all the planets of civilization, attracted by carefully worded advertisements of good jobs at high pay on new and highly secret projects on newly discovered planets. There were hundreds of such ads. Most were probably the patrols, and led here. Many were of Spaceways, Uranium Incorporated, and other mercantile firms. The possibility that some of them might lead to what was now being called Bosconia had been tested thoroughly, but with uniformly negative results. Lensman had applied by scores for those non-patrol jobs and had found them bona fide. The conclusion was unavoidable. Boscone was doing its recruitment on planets unknown to any wearer of Arisia's lens. On the other hand, more than a trickle of Bosconians were applying for patrol jobs, but Samms was almost certain that none had been accepted. The final screening was done by Lensman, and in such matters Lensman did not make many or serious mistakes. Bennett had been informed of the First Lensman's arrival, and Kinnison had been guilty of a gross understatement indeed in telling Samms that he would not be regarded as a stranger. Wherever Samms went, he was met by wildly enthusiastic crowds. He had to make speeches, each of which was climaxed by a tremendous roar of, "To Liberation Day!" "No Lensman material here, you say, Rod?" Samms asked, after the first city-shaking demonstration was over. One of his prime concerns throughout his life was this. "With all this enthusiasm, sure?" "We haven't found any good enough to refer to you yet. However, in a few years, when the younger generation gets a little older, there certainly will be." Check. The tour of inspection and acquaintance was finished. The two Lensmen started back to Earth. "Well, my skeptical and pessimistic friend, was I lying or not?" Kinnison asked, as soon as the speedster's ports were sealed. "Can they match that or not?" "You weren't, and I don't believe they can. I have never seen anything like it. Autocracies have parades and cheers and demonstrations, of course, but they have always been forced, artificial. Those were spontaneous. Not only that, but the enthusiasm will carry through. We'll be piping hot and ready to go. But about this stumping. You said I'd better start as soon as we get back?" "Within a few days, I'd say." "I wouldn't wonder. So let's use this time in working out a plan of campaign. My idea was to start out like this." End of Chapter 17. Chapter 18 of First Lensman by E. Doc Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. First Lensman, Chapter 18. Conway Costigan, leaving behind him scores of clues, all highly misleading, severed his connection with Uranium Inc. as soon as he dared after Operation Zwilnik had been brought to a successful close. The technical operation, that is. The legal battles in which it figured so largely were to run on for enough years to make the word Zwilnik a common noun and adjective in the language. He came to tell us as unobtrusively as was his wont, and took an inconspicuous but very active part in Operation Matisse, now in full swing. "Now is the time for all good men and true to come to the aid of the party, eh?" Cleo Costigan giggled. "You can play that straight across the keyboard of your electric, pet, and not with just 2 fingers either. Did you hear what the boss told him today?" "Yes." The girl's levity disappeared. "They're so dirty, Spud. I'm really afraid." "So am I. But we're not too lily-fingered ourselves, if we have to be, and we're covering 'em like a blanket, Kinnison and Samms both." "Good." "And in that connection, I'll have to be out half the night again tonight. All right?" "Of course. It's so nice having you home at all, darling, instead of a million light-years away, that I'm practically delirious with delight." It was sometimes hard to tell what impish Mrs. Costigan meant by what she said. Costigan looked at her, decided she was taking him for a ride, and smacked her a couple of times where it would do the most good. He then kissed her thoroughly and left. He had very little time these days either to himself or for his lovely and adored wife. For Roderick Kinnison's campaign, which had started out rough and not too clean, became rougher and no cleaner as it went along. Morgan and his crew were swinging from the heels, with everything and anything they could dig up or invent, however little of truth or even of plausibility it might contain. And Rod the Rock had never held even in principle with the gentle precept of turning the other cheek. He was rather an Old Testamentarian, and he was no neophyte at dirty fighting. As a young operative, skilled in the punishing, maiming techniques of hand-to-hand, rough-and-tumble combat, he had brawled successfully in most of the dives of most of the Solarian planets and of most of their moons. With this background, and being a quick study, and under the masterly coaching of Virgil Samms, Nels Bergenholm, and Rularion of North Polar Jupiter, it did not take him long to learn the various gambits and ripostes of this non-physical, but nevertheless no-holds-barred political mayhem. And the boys and girls of the patrol worked like badgers, digging up an item here and a fact there and a bit of information somewhere else, all for the day of reckoning which was to come. They used ultra-wave scanners, spy rays, long eyes, stool pigeons, everything they could think of to use, and they could not always be blocked out or evaded. "We've got it, boss. Now let's use it." "No, save it. Nail it down solid. Get the facts, names, dates, places, and amounts. Prove it first, then save it." Prove it, save it. The joint injunction was used so often that it came to be a slogan and was accepted as such. Unlike most slogans, however, it was carefully and diligently put to use. The operatives proved it and saved it, over and over again. By dint of what unsparing effort and selfless devotion only they themselves ever fully knew. Kinnison stumped the continent. He visited every state, all of the big cities, most of the towns, and many villages and hamlets, and always, wherever he went, a part of the show was to demonstrate to his audiences how the lens worked. Look at me. You know that no two individuals are or ever can be alike. Robert Johnson is not like Fred Smith. Joe Jones is entirely different from John Brown. Look at me again. Concentrate upon whatever it is in your mind that makes me Roderick Kinnison, the individual. That will enable each of you to get into as close touch with me as though our two minds were one. I am not talking now. You are reading my mind. Since you are reading my very mind, you know exactly what I am really thinking, for better or for worse. It is impossible for my mind to lie to yours, since I can change neither the basic pattern of my personality nor my basic way of thought, nor would I if I could. Being in my mind, you know that already. You know what my basic quality is. My friends call it strength and courage. Pirate Chief Morgan and his cutthroat crew call it many other things. Be that as it may, you now know whether or not you want me for your president. I can do nothing whatever to sway your opinion, for what your minds have perceived you know to be the truth. That is the way the lens works. It bears the depths of my mind to yours, and in return enables me to understand your thoughts. But it is in no sense hypnotism, as Morgan is so foolishly trying to make you believe. Morgan knows as well as the rest of us do that even the most accomplished hypnotist, with all his apparatus, cannot affect a strong and definitely opposed will. He is therefore saying that each and every one of you now receiving this thought is such a spineless weakling that, but you may draw your own conclusions. In closing, remember, nail this fact down so solidly that you will never forget it. A sound and healthy mind cannot lie. The mouth can and does. So does the typewriter. But the mind never. I can hide my thoughts from you even while we are on rapport like this, but I cannot lie to you. That is why, someday, all of your highest executives will have to be lensmen, and not politicians, diplomats, crooks, and boodlers. I thank you. As that long, bitter, incredibly vicious campaign neared its vitriolic end, tension mounted higher and ever higher. And in a room in the Samms home, 3 young lensmen and a red-haired girl were not at ease. All 4 were lean and drawn. Jack Kinnison was talking. Not the party so much, but Dad. He started out with bare fists, and now he's wading into 'em with spiked brass knuckles. You can play that across the board, Costigan agreed. He's really giving 'em hell, Northrop said admiringly. Did you boys listen in on his Casper speech last night? They hadn't. They had been too busy. I could give it to you on your lenses, but I couldn't reproduce the tone, the exquisite way he lifted large pieces of hide and rubbed salt into the raw places. When he gets excited, you know he can't help but use his voice, too, so I got some of it on a record. He starts out on voice, nice and easy, as usual, then goes on to his lens without talking, then starts yelling as well as thinking. Listen. You ought to have a lensman president. You may not believe that any lensman is, and as a matter of fact must be, incorruptible. That is my belief, as you can feel for yourselves, but I cannot prove it to you. Only time can do that. It is a self-evident fact, however, which you can feel for yourselves, that a lensman president could not lie to you except by word of mouth or in writing. You could demand from him at any time a lensed statement upon any subject. Upon some matters of state he could and should refuse to answer, but not upon any question involving moral turpitude. If he answered, you would know the truth. If he refused to answer, you would know why and could initiate impeachment proceedings then and there. In the past, there have been presidents who used that high office for low purposes, whose very memory reeks of malfeasance and corruption. One was impeached, others should have been. Witherspoon never should have been elected. Witherspoon should have been impeached the day after he was inaugurated. Witherspoon should be impeached now. We know, and at the grand rally at New York Spaceport 3 weeks from tonight we are going to prove that Witherspoon is simply a minor cogwheel in the Morgantown-Isaacson machine, playing footsie at command with whatever group happens to be the highest bidder at the moment, irrespective of North America's or the system's good. Witherspoon is a gangster, a cheat, and a goddamn liar. But he is of very little actual importance, merely a boodling nincompoop. Morgan is the real boss and the real menace, the operating engineer of the lowest down, lousiest, filthiest, rottenest, most corrupt machine of murderers, extortionists, bribe-takers, panderers, perjurers, and other pimples on the body politic that has ever disgraced any so-called civilized government. Good night. "Wow," Jack Kinnison yelped. "That's high even for him." "Just a minute, Jack," Jill cautioned. "The other side, too. Listen to this choice bit from Senator Morgan." "It is not exactly hypnotism, but something infinitely worse. Something that steals away your very minds, that makes anyone listening believe that white is yellow, red purple, or pea green. Until our scientists have checked this menace, until we have every wear of that cursed lens behind steel bars, I advise you in all earnestness not to listen to them at all. If you do listen, your minds will surely be insidiously decomposed and broken. You will surely end your days gibbering in a padded cell. And murders? Murders! The feeble remnants of the gangs which our government has all but wiped out may perhaps commit a murder or so per year, the perpetrators of which are caught, tried, and punished. But how many of your sons and daughters has Roderick Kinnison murdered, either personally or through his uniformed slaves? Think, read the record, then make him explain if he can, but do not listen to his lying, mind-destroying lens. Democracy? Bah! What does Rod the Rock Kinnison, the hardest, most vicious tyrant, the most relentless and pitiless martinet ever known to any armed force in the long history of our world, know of democracy? Nothing. He understands only force. All who oppose him in anything, however small, or who seek to reason with him, die without record or trace. And if he is not arrested, tried, and executed, all such will continue, tracelessly and without any pretense of trial, to die. But at bottom, even though he is not intelligent enough to realize it, he is merely one more in the long parade of tools of ruthless and predatory wealth, the moneyed powers. They, my friends, never sleep. They have only one God, one tenet, one creed, the almighty credit. That is what they are after, and note how craftily, how stealthily they have done and are doing their grabbing. Where is your representation upon the so-called Galactic Council? How did this criminal, this vicious, this outrageously unconstitutional, this irresponsible, uncontrollable, and dictatorial monstrosity come into being? How and when did you give this bloated colossus the right to establish its own currency, to have the immeasurable effrontery to debar the solidest currency in the universe, the credit of North America, from interplanetary and interstellar commerce? Their aim is clear. They intend to tax you into slavery and death. Do not forget for one instant, my friends, that the power to tax is the power to destroy. The power to tax is the power to destroy. Our forefathers fought and bled and died to establish the principle that taxation without And so on, for 1 solid hour, Jill snarled as she snapped the switch viciously. How do you like them potatoes? Hell's blazing pinnacles. This from Jack, silent for seconds, and rugged stuff. Very, very rugged, from Northrop. No wonder you look sort of pooped, Spud. Being chief bodyguard must have developed recently into quite a chore. You ain't just snapping your choppers, bub, was Costigan's grimly flippant reply. I've yelled for help, in force. So have I, and I'm going to yell again right now, Jack declared. I don't know whether Dad is going to kill Morgan or not, and don't give a damn. But if Morgan isn't going all out to kill Dad, it's because they've forgotten how to make bombs. He lensed a call to Bergenholm. Yes, Jack? I will refer you to Rolarian, who has had this matter under consideration. Yes, John Kinnison, I have considered the matter and have taken action. The Jovian's calmly assured thought rolled into the minds of all, even lensless Jill's. The point, youth, was well taken. It was your thought that some thousands, perhaps 5, of spy ray operators and other operatives will be required to ensure that the Grand Rally will not be marred by episodes of violence. It was, Jack said flatly. It still is. Not having considered all possible contingencies, nor the extent of the field of necessary actions, you err. The number will approach 19,000 very nearly. Admiral Clayton has been so advised, and his staff is now at work upon a plan of action in accordance with my recommendation. Your suggestions, Conway Costigan, in the matter of immediate protection of Roderick Kinnison's person are now in effect, and you are hereby relieved of that responsibility. I assume that you four wish to continue at work?" The Jovian's assumption was sound. "I suggest, then, that you confer with Admiral Clayton and fit yourselves into his program of security. I intend to make the same suggestion to all lensmen and other qualified persons not engaged in work of more pressing importance." Rularian cut off, and Jack scowled blackly. "The Grand Rally is going to be held 3 weeks before Election Day. I still don't like it. I'd save it until the night before election, knock their teeth out with it at the last possible minute." "You're wrong, Jack. The Chief is right," Costigan argued. "2 ways. 1, we can't play that kind of ball. 2, this gives them just enough rope to hang themselves." "Well, maybe." Kinnison-like, Jack was far from being convinced. "But that's the way it's going to be, so let's call Clayton." "First," Costigan broke in, "Jill, will you please explain why they have to waste as big a man as Kinnison on such a piffling job as president? I was out in the sticks, you know. It doesn't make sense." "Because he's the only man alive who can lick Morgan's machine at the polls." Jill stated a simple fact. "The patrol can get along without him for 1 term. After that, it won't make any difference." "But Morgan works from the sidelines. Why couldn't he?" "The psychology is entirely different. Morgan is a boss. Pops Kinnison isn't. He's a leader. See?" "Oh, I guess so. Yes, go ahead." Outwardly, New York Spaceport did not change appreciably. At any given moment of day or night, there were so many hundreds of persons strolling aimlessly or walking purposely about that an extra 100 or so made no perceptible difference. And the spaceport was only the end point. The patrol's activities began hundreds or thousands or millions or billions of miles away from Earth's metropolis. A web was set up through which not even a grain of sand meteorite could pass undetected. Every spaceship bound for Earth carried at least 1 passenger who would not otherwise have been aboard. Passengers who, if not wearing lenses, carried service special equipment amply sufficient for the work in hand. Geigers and other vastly more complicated mechanisms flew toward Earth from every direction in space, streamed toward New York in Earth's every channel of traffic. Every train and plane, every bus and boat and car, every conveyance of every kind, and every pedestrian approaching New York City was searched, with a search as thorough as it was unobtrusive. And everything and every entity approaching New York Spaceport was combed literally by the cubic millimeter. No arrests were made. No package was confiscated or even disturbed throughout the ranks of public checkboxes, in private offices, or in elaborate or casual hiding places. As far as the enemy knew, the patrol had no suspicion whatever that anything out of the ordinary was going on. That is, until the last possible minute. Then a tall, lean, space-tanned veteran spoke softly aloud as though to himself. "Spy ray blocks, interference, umbrella, on. Report." That voice, low and soft as it was picked up by every service special receiver within a radius of 1,000 miles, and by every lensman listening wherever he might be. So were, in a matter of seconds, the replies. "Spy ray blocks on, sir." "Interference on, sir." "Umbrella on, sir." No spy ray could be driven into any part of the tremendous port. No beam, communicator, or detonating could operate anywhere near it. The enemy would now know that something had gone wrong, but he would not be able to do anything about it. "Reports received," the tanned man said, still quietly. "Operation Zunk will proceed as scheduled." And 471 highly skilled men, carrying duplicate keys and or whatever other specialized apparatus and equipment would be necessary, quietly took possession of 471 objects of almost that many shapes and sizes. And out in the gathering crowd, a few disturbances occurred, and a few ambulances dashed busily here and there. Some women had fainted, no doubt, ran the report. They always did. And Conway Costigan, who had been watching, without seeming even to look at him, a porter loading a truck with opulent-looking hand luggage from a locker, followed man and truck out into the concourse. Closing up, he asked, "Where are you taking that luggage, Charlie?" "Up ramp 1, boss," came the unflurried reply. "Flight 90 will be taking off on account of this jamboree, and they want it right up there handy." "Take it down to the—" Over the years, a good many men had tried to catch Conway Costigan off guard or napping, to beat him to the punch or to the draw, with a startlingly uniform lack of success. The lensman's fist traveled a bare 7 inches. The supposed porter gasped once and traveled, or rather staggered backward, approximately 7 feet, before he collapsed and sprawled unconscious upon the pavement. "Decontamination," Costigan remarked, apparently to empty air, as he picked the fellow up and draped him limply over the truck full of suitcases. "Dick, front and center, Area 46, Class FX, hotter than the middle tail race of hell." "You called Deke?" A man came running up. "FX 619. This it?" "Check. It's yours, parter and all. Take it away." Costigan strolled on until he met Jack Kinnison, who had a rapidly developing mouse under his left eye. "How did that happen, Jack?" he demanded sharply. "Something slip?" "Not exactly," Kinnison grinned ruefully. "I have the damnedest luck. A woman, an old lady at that, thought I was staging a hold-up and swung on me with her handbag, southpaw and from the rear. And if you laugh, you untuneful harp, I'll hang one right on the end of your chin, so help me." "Far be it from such," Costigan assured him, and did not quite laugh. "Wonder how we came out. They should have reported before this. Psst, here it comes." Decontamination was complete. Operation Zunk had been a 100% success. There had been no casualties. Except for one black eye, Costigan could not help adding, but his lens and his service specials were off. Jack would have brained him if any of them had been on. Linking arms, the 2 lensmen strode away toward Ramp 4, which was to be their station. This was the largest crowd Earth had ever known. Everybody, particularly the nationalists, had wondered why this climactic political rally had been set for 3 full weeks ahead of the election, but their curiosity had not been satisfied. Furthermore, this meeting had been advertised as no previous one had ever been. Neither pains nor cash had been spared in giving it the greatest build-up ever known. Not only had every channel of communication been loaded for weeks, but also Sam's workers had been very busily engaged in starting rumors, which grew, as rumors do, into things which their own fathers and mothers could not recognize. And the baffled nationalists, trying to play the whole thing down, made matters worse. Interest spread from North America to the other continents, to the other planets, and to the other solar systems. Thus, to say that everybody was interested in and was listening to the Cosmocrats' grand rally would not be too serious an exaggeration. Roderick Kinnison stepped up to the battery of microphones. Certain screens were cut. "Fellow entities of civilization and others. While it may seem strange to broadcast a political rally to other continents and to beam it to other worlds, it was necessary in this case. The message to be given, while it will go into the political affairs of the North American continent of Tellus, will deal primarily with a far larger thing, a matter which will be of paramount importance to all intelligent beings of every inhabited world. You know how to attune your minds to mine. Do it now." He staggered mentally under the shock of encountering practically simultaneously so many minds, but rallied strongly and went on via lens. "My first message is not to you, my fellow cosmocrats, nor to you, my fellow dwellers on Earth. nor even to you, my fellow adherents to civilization, but to the enemy. I do not mean my political opponents, the nationalists, who are almost all loyal fellow North Americans. I mean the entities who are using the leaders of that nationalist party as pawns in a vastly larger game. I know, enemy, that you are listening. I know that you had goon squads in this audience to kill me and my superior officer. Know now that they are impotent. I know that you had atomic bombs with which to obliterate this assemblage and this entire area. They have been disassembled and stored. I know that you had large supplies of radioactive dusts. They now lie in the patrol vaults near Weehawken. All the devices which you intended to employ are known, and all save one have been either nullified or confiscated. That one exception is your war fleet, a force sufficient in your opinion to wipe out all the armed forces of the Galactic Patrol. You intended to use it in case we cosmocrats win this forthcoming election. You may decide to use it now. Do so if you like. You can do nothing to interrupt or to affect this meeting. This is all I have to say to you, enemy of civilization. Now to you, my legitimate audience. I am not here to deliver the address promised you, but merely to introduce the real speaker, First Lensman Virgil Samms. A mental gasp, million strong, made itself tellingly felt. Yes, First Lensman Samms, of whom you all know. He has not been attending political meetings because we, his advisers, would not let him. Why? Here are the facts. Through Archibald Isaacson of Interstellar Spaceways, he was offered a bribe which would in a few years have amounted to some 50 billion credits, more wealth than any individual entity has ever possessed. Then there was an attempt at murder, which we were able, just barely, to block. Knowing there was no other place on Earth where he would be safe, we took him to the Hill. You know what happened. You know what condition the Hill is in now. This warfare was ascribed to pirates. This whole stupendous operation, however, was made in a vain attempt to kill one man, Virgil Samms. The enemy knew, and we learned, that Samms is the greatest man who has ever lived. His name will last as long as civilization endures, for it is he, and only he, who can make it possible for civilization to endure. Why was I not killed? Why was I allowed to keep on making campaign speeches? Because I do not count. I am of no more importance to the cause of civilization than is my opponent Witherspoon to that of the enemy. I am a wheelhorse, a plugger. You all know me, Rocky Rod Kinnison, the hard-boiled egg. I've got guts enough to stand up and fight for what I know is right. I've got the guts and the inclination to stand up and slug it out toe-to-toe with man, beast, or devil. I would make and will make a good president. I've got the guts and inclination to keep on slugging after you elect me. Before God, I promise to smash down every machine-made crook who tries to hold any part of our government down in the reeking muck in which it now is. I am a plugger and a slugger, with no spark of the terrific flame of inspirational genius which makes Virgil Samms what he so uniquely is. My kind may be important, but I individually am not. There are so many of us. If they had killed me, another slugger would have taken my place, and the effect upon the job would have been nil. Virgil Samms, however, cannot be replaced, and the enemy knows it. He is unique in all history. No one else can do his job. If he is killed before the principles for which he is working are firmly established, civilization will collapse back into barbarism. It will not recover until another such mind comes into existence, the probability of which occurrence I will let you compute for yourselves. For those reasons, Virgil Samms is not here in person, nor is he in the Hill, since the enemy may now possess weapons powerful enough to destroy not only that hitherto impregnable fortress, but also the whole Earth. And they would destroy Earth without a qualm, if in so doing they could kill the First Lensman. Therefore, Samms is now out in deep space. Our fleet is waiting to be attacked. If we win, the Galactic Patrol will go on. If we lose, we hope you shall have learned enough so that we will not have died uselessly." "Die? Why should you die? You are safe on Earth." "Ah, one of the goons sent that thought. If our fleet is defeated, no Lensman anywhere will live a week. The enemy will see to that. That is all from me. Stay tuned. Come in, First Lensman Virgil Samms. Take over, sir." It was psychologically impossible for Virgil Samms to use such language as Kinnison had just employed, nor was it either necessary or desirable that he should. The ground had been prepared. Therefore, coldly, impersonally, logically, tellingly, he told the whole terrific story. He revealed the most important things dug up by the Patrol's indefatigable investigators, reciting names, places, dates, transactions, and amounts. Only in the last couple of minutes did he warm up at all. Nor is this in any sense a smear campaign or a bringing of baseless charges to becloud the issue or to vilify without cause and upon the very eve of election a political opponent. These are facts. Formal charges are now being preferred. Every person mentioned, and many others, will be put under arrest as soon as possible. If any one of them were in any degree innocent, our case against him could be made to fall in less than the 3 weeks intervening before Election Day. That is why this meeting is being held at this time. Not one of them is innocent. Being guilty, and knowing that we can and will prove guilt, they will adopt a policy of delay and recrimination. Since our courts are, for the most part, just, the accused will be able to delay the trials and the actual presentation of evidence until after Election Day. Forewarned, however, you will know exactly why the trials will have been delayed, and in spite of the fog of misrepresentation, you will know where the truth lies. You will know how to cast your votes. You will vote for Roderick Kinnison and for those who support him. There is no need for me to enlarge upon the character of Port Admiral Kinnison. You know him as well as I do. Honest, incorruptible, fearless. You know that he will make the best president we have ever had. If you do not already know it, ask any one of the hundreds of thousands of strong, able, clear-thinking young men and women who have served under him in our armed forces. I thank you, everyone who has listened, for your interest. End of Chapter 18. Chapter 19 of First Lensman by E. E. Doc Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. First Lensman, Chapter 19. As long as they were Commodores, Clayton of North America and Schweikert of Europe had stayed fairly close to the home planet, except for infrequent vacation trips. With the formation of the Galactic Patrol, however, and their becoming Admiral and Lieutenant Admiral of the First Galactic Region, and their acquisition of lenses, the radius of their sphere of action was tremendously increased. One or the other of them was always to be found in Grand Fleet headquarters at New York Spaceport, but only very seldom were both of them there at once. And if the absentee were not to be found on Earth, what of it? The First Galactic Region included all of the solar systems and all of the planets adherent to civilization, and the absentee could, as a matter of business and duty, be practically anywhere. Usually, however, he was not upon any of the generally known planets, but upon Bennett, getting acquainted with the officers, supervising the drilling of Grand Fleet and new maneuvers, teaching classes in advanced strategy, and holding skull practice generally. It was hard work and not too inspiring, but in the end it paid off big. They knew their men. Their men knew them. They could work together with a snap, a smoothness, a precision otherwise impossible. For imported top brass, unknown to and unacquainted with the body of command, cannot have and does not expect the deep regard and the earned respect so necessary to high morale. Clayton and Schweikert had both. They started early enough, worked hard enough, and had enough stuff to earn both. Thus it came about that, when upon a scheduled day the two admirals came to Bennett together, they were greeted as enthusiastically as though they had been Bennettons born and bred, and their welcome became a planet-wide celebration when Clayton issued the orders which all Bennett had been waiting so long and so impatiently to hear. Bennettons were at last to leave Bennett. Group after group, subfleet after subfleet, the component units of the Galactic Patrol's Grand Fleet took off. They assembled in space. They maneuvered enough to shake themselves down into some semblance of unity. They practiced the new maneuvers. They blasted off in formation for Sol. And as the tremendous armada neared the solar system, it met, or rather was joined by, the patrol ships about which Morgan and his minions already knew, each of which fitted itself into its long-assigned place. Every planet of civilization had sent its every vessel capable of putting out a screen or of throwing a beam, but so immense was the number of warships in Grand Fleet that this increment, great as it intrinsically was, made no perceptible difference in its size. On Rally Day, Grand Fleet lay poised near Earth. As soon as he had introduced Samms to the intensely interested listeners at the rally, Roderick Kinnison disappeared. Actually, he drove a bug to a distant corner of the spaceport and left the Earth in a light cruiser, but to all intents and purposes, so engrossed was everyone in what Samms was saying, Kinnison simply vanished. Samms was already in the Boise. The port admiral went out to his old flagship, the Chicago. Nor, in case any observer of the enemy should be trying to keep track of him, could his course be traced. Cleveland and Northrop and Rularion and all they needed of the vast resources of the patrol saw to that. Neither Samms nor Kinnison had any business being with Grand Fleet in person, of course, and both knew it. But everyone knew why they were there, and were glad that the two top lensmen had decided to live or die with their fleet. If Grand Fleet won, they would probably live. If Grand Fleet lost, they would certainly die, if not in the pyrotechnic dissolution of their ships, then in a matter of days upon the ground. With the fleet, their presence would contribute markedly to morale. It was a chance very much worth taking. Nor were Clayton and Schweikert together, or even near each other. Samms, Kinnison, and the other two admirals were as far away from each other as they could get and still remain in Grand Fleet's fighting cylinder. Cylinder? Yes. The patrol's Board of Strategy, assuming that the enemy would attack in conventional cone formation, and knowing that one cone could defeat another only after a long and costly engagement, had long since spent months and months at war games in their tactical tanks, in search of a better formation. They had found it. Theoretically, a cylinder of proper composition could defeat, with negligible loss and in a very short time, the best cones they were able to devise. The drawback was that the ships composing a theoretically efficient cylinder would have to be highly specialized and vastly greater in number than any one power had ever been able to put into the ether. However, with all the resources of Bennett devoted to construction, this difficulty would not be insuperable. This, of course, brought up the question of what would happen if cylinder met cylinder, if the black strategists should also have arrived at the same solution, and this question remained unanswered. Or rather, there were too many answers, no two of which agreed, like those to the classical one of what would happen if an irresistible force should strike an immovable object. There would be a lot of intensely interesting byproducts. Even Rularion of Jove did not come up with a definite solution. Nor did Bergenholm, who, although a comparatively obscure young lensman scientist and not a member of the Galactic Council, was frequently called into consultation because of his unique ability to arrive at correct conclusions via some obscurely short-circuiting process of thought. Well, Port Admiral Kinnison had concluded finally, if they've got one too, we'll just have to shorten ours up, widen it out, and pray. Clayton to Port Admiral Kinnison, came a communication through channels. Have you any additional orders or instructions? Kinnison to Admiral Clayton. None. The Port Admiral replied as formally, then went on via lens. No comment or criticism to make, Alex. You fellows have done a job so far, and you'll keep on doing one. How much detection have you got out? 12 detets, 3 globes of diesels. If we sit here and do nothing, the boys will get edgy and go stale. So if you and Virg agree, we'll give 'em some practice. Lord knows they need it, and it'll keep them on their toes. But about the blacks, they may be figuring on delaying any action until we've had time to crack from boredom. What's your idea on that? I've been worrying about the same thing. Practice will help, but whether enough or not, I don't know. What do you think, Virg? Will they hold it up deliberately or strike fast? Fast, the First Lensman replied, promptly and definitely. As soon as they possibly can, for several reasons. They don't know our real strength any more than we know theirs. They undoubtedly believe, however, the same as we do, that they are more efficient than we are and have the larger force. By their own need of practice, they will know ours. They do not attach nearly as much importance to morale as we do. By the very nature of their regime, they can't. Also, our open challenge will tend very definitely to force their hands, since face-saving is even more important to them than it is to us. They will strike as soon as they can and as hard as they can. Grand Fleet maneuvers were begun, but in a day or so the alarms came blasting in. The enemy had been detected, coming in, as the previous Black Fleet had come, from the direction of Coma Berenices. Calculating machines clicked and whirred, orders were flashed, and a brief string of numbers, ships by the hundreds and the thousands, flashed into their assigned positions. Or, more precisely, almost into them. Most of the navigators and pilots had not had enough practice yet to hit their assigned positions exactly on the first try, since a radical change in axial direction was involved, but they did pretty well. A few minutes of juggling and jockeying were enough. Clayton and Schweikert used a little caustic language, via lens and to their fellow lensmen only, of course, but Samms and Kinnison were well enough pleased. The time of formation had been very satisfactorily short, and the cone was smooth, symmetrical, and of beautifully uniform density. The preliminary formation was a cone, not a cylinder. It was not a conventional cone of battle, in that it was not of standard composition, was too big, and had altogether too many ships for its size. It was, however, of the conventional shape, and it was believed that by the time the enemy could perceive any significant differences, it would be too late for him to do anything about it. The cylinder would be forming about that time anyway, and it was almost believed, at least it was strongly hoped, that the enemy would not have the time or the knowledge or the equipment to do anything about that either. Kinnison grinned to himself as his mind, en rapport with Clayton's, watched the enemy's cone of battle enlarge upon the Admiral's conning plate. It was big and powerful. The Galactic Patrol's publicly known forces would have stood exactly the chance of the proverbial snowball in the nether regions. It was not, however, the Port Admiral thought, big enough to form an efficient cylinder, or to handle the patrol's real force in any fashion, and unless they shifted within the next second or two, it would be too late for the enemy to do anything at all. As though by magic, about 95% of the patrol's tremendous cone changed into a tightly packed double cylinder. This maneuver was much simpler than the previous one, and had been practiced to perfection. The mouth of the cone closed in and lengthened. The closed end opened out and shortened. Tractors and pressers leapt from ship to ship, binding the whole myriad of hitherto discrete units into a single structure as solid, even comparatively as to size, as a cantilever bridge. And instead of remaining quiescent, waiting to be attacked, the cylinder flashed forward, inertialess, at maximum blast. Throughout the years, the violence, intensity, and sheer brute power of offensive weapons had increased steadily. Defensive armament had kept step. One fundamental fact, however, had not changed throughout the ages, and has not changed yet. 3 or more units of given power have always been able to conquer 1 unit of the same power, if engagement could be forced and no assistance could be given, and 2 units could practically always do so. Fundamentally, therefore, strategy always has been, and still is, the development of new artifices and techniques by virtue of which 2 or more of our units may attack 1 of theirs, the while affording the minimum of opportunity for them to retaliate in kind. The patrol's grand fleet flashed forward, almost exactly along the axis of the black cone, right where the enemy wanted it, or so he thought. Straight into the yawning mouth, erupting now a blast of flame beside which the wildest imaginings of inferno must pale into insignificance, straight along that raging axis toward the apex, at the terrific speed of the 2 directly opposed velocities of flight. But to the complete consternation of the Black High Command, nothing much happened. For, as has been pointed out, that cylinder was not of even approximately normal composition. In fact, there was not a normal war vessel in it. The outer skin and both ends of the cylinder were purely defensive. Those vessels, packed so closely that their repeller fields actually touched, were all screen. None of them had a beam hot enough to light a match. Conversely, the inner layer, or liner, was composed of vessels that were practically all offense. They had to be protected at every point, but how they could ladle it out. The leading and trailing edges of the formation, the ends of the gigantic pipe, so to speak, would of course bear the brunt of the black attack, and it was this factor that had given the patrol strategists the most serious concern. Wherefore, the first 10 and the last 6 double rings of ships were special indeed. They were all screen, nothing else. They were drones, operated by remote control, carrying no living thing. If the patrol losses could be held to 8 double rings of ships at the first pass and 4 at the second, theoretical computations indicated losses of 6 and 2, Samms and his fellows would be well content. All of the patrol ships had, of course, the standard equipment of so-called violet, green, and red fields, as well as duodecaply latomate and ordinary atomic bombs, dirigible torpedoes and transporters, slicers, polycyclic drills, and so on. But in this battle, the principal reliance was to be placed upon the sheer, brutal, overwhelming power of what had been called the macro beam, now simply the beam. Furthermore, in the incredibly incandescent frenzy of the chosen field of action, the cylinder was to attack the cone at its very strongest part. No conceivable material projectile could have lasted a single microsecond after leaving the screens of force of its parent vessel. It could have flown fast enough. Ultra-beam trackers could have steered it rapidly enough and accurately enough. But before it could have traveled a foot, even at ultralight speed, it would have ceased utterly to be. It would have been resolved into its subatomic constituent particles and waves. Nothing material could exist, except instantaneously, in the field of force filling the axis of the Black's cone of battle, a field beside which the exact center of a multi-billion-volt flash of lightning would constitute a dead area. That field, however, encountered no material object. The patrol's screeners, packed so closely as to have a 400% overlap, had been designed to withstand precisely that inconceivable environment. Practically all of them withstood it, and in a fraction of a second the hollow forward end of the cylinder engulfed, pipe-wise, the entire apex of the enemy's war cone, and the hitherto idle sluggers of the cylinder's liner went to work. Each of those vessels had one heavy pressor beam, each having the same push as every other, directed inward toward the cylinder's axis, and backward at an angle of 15 degrees from the perpendicular line between ship and axis. Therefore, wherever any black ship entered the patrol cylinder, or however, it was driven to and held at the axis and forced backward along that axis. None of them, however, got very far. They were perforce in single file, one ship opposing at least one solid ring of giant sluggers who did not have to concern themselves with defense, but could pour every iota of their tremendous resources into offensive beams. Thus the odds were not merely 2 or 3 to 1, but never less than 80, and very frequently over 200 to 1. Under the impact of those unimaginable torrents of force, the screens of the engulfed vessels flashed once, practically instantaneously through the spectrum, and went down. Whether they had 2 or 3 or 4 courses made no difference. In fact, even the ultra-speed analyzers of the observers could not tell. Then, a couple of microseconds later, the wall shields, the strongest fabrics of force developed by man up to that time, also failed. Then those ravenous fields of force struck bare, unprotected metal, and every molecule, inorganic and organic, of ships and contents alike, disappeared in a bursting flare of energy so raw and so violent as to stagger even those who had brought it into existence. It was certainly vastly more than a mere volatilization. It was deduced later that the detonating unstoppable isotopes of the Black's own bombs, in the frightful temperatures already existing in the Patrol's quasi-solid beams, had initiated a chain reaction which had resulted in the fissioning of a considerable proportion of the atomic nuclei of usually completely stable elements. The cylinder stopped. The lensman took stock. The depth of erosion of the leading edge had averaged almost exactly 6 double rings of drones. In places, the 6th ring was still intact. In others, which had encountered unusually concentrated beaming, the 7th was gone. Also, a fraction of 1% of the manned war vessels had disappeared. Brief though the time of engagement had been, the enemy had been able to concentrate enough beams to burn a few holes through the walls of the attacking cylinder. It had not been hoped that more than a few hundreds of black vessels could be blown out of the ether at this first pass. General Staff had been sure, however, that the heaviest and most dangerous ships, including those carrying the enemy's high command, would be among them. The midsection of the apex of the conventional cone of battle had always been the safest place to be. Therefore, that was where the black admirals had been, and therefore they no longer lived. In a few seconds, it became clear that if any black high command existed, it was not in shape to function efficiently. Some of the enemy's ships were still blasting, with little or no concerted effort, at the regulation cone which the cylinder had left behind. A few were attempting to get into some kind of a formation, possibly to attack the patrol cylinder. Indecision was visible and rampant. To turn that tremendous cylindrical engine of destruction around would have been a task of hours, but it was not necessary. Instead, each vessel cut its tractors and pressers, spun end for end, reconnected, and retraced almost exactly its previous course, cutting out and blasting into nothingness another plug of black warships. Another reversal, another dash. And this time, so disorganized were the foes and so feeble the beaming, not a single patrol vessel was lost. The Black Fleet, so proud and so conquering of mien a few minutes before, had fallen completely apart. "That's enough, Rod, don't you think?" Samms thought then. "Please order Clayton to cease action, so that we can hold a parley with their senior officers." "Parley, hell!" Kinnison's answering thought was a snarl. "We've got 'em going. Mop 'em up before they can pull themselves together. Parley be damned!" Beyond a certain point, military action becomes indefensible butchery, of which our Galactic Patrol will never be guilty. That point has now been reached. If you do not agree with me, I'll be glad to call a council meeting to decide which of us is right. "That isn't necessary. You're right. That's one reason I'm not First Lensman." The port admiral, fury and fire ebbing from his mind, issued orders. The patrol forces hung motionless in space. "As President of the Galactic Council, Virg, take over." Spy rays probed and searched. A communicator beam was sent. Virgil Samms spoke aloud, in the lingua franca of deep space. "Connect me, please, with the senior officer of your fleet." There appeared upon Sam's plate a strong, not unhandsome face, deep stamped with the bitter hopelessness of a strong man facing certain death. "You've got us. Come on and finish us." Some such indoctrination was to be expected, but I anticipate no trouble in convincing you that you have been grossly misinformed in everything you have been told concerning us, our aims, our ethics, our morals, and our standards of conduct. There are, I assume, other surviving officers of your rank, although of lesser seniority? "There are 10 other vice-admirals, but I am in command. They will obey my orders or die." "Nevertheless, they shall be heard. Please go inert, match our intrinsic velocity, and come aboard, all 11 of you. We wish to explore with all of you the possibilities of a lasting peace between our worlds." "Peace? Bah! Why lie?" The Black Commander's expression did not change. "I know what you are, and what you do to conquered races. We prefer a clean, quick death in your beams to the kind you deal out in your torture rooms and experimental laboratories. Come ahead. I intend to attack you as soon as I can make a formation." "I repeat, you have been grossly, terribly, shockingly misinformed." Sam's voice was quiet and steady. His eyes held those of the other. "We are civilized men, not barbarians or savages. Does not the fact that we ceased hostilities so soon mean anything to you?" For the first time, the stranger's face changed subtly, and Sam's pressed the slight advantage. "I see it does. Now, if you will converse with me mind to mind—" The First Lensman felt for the man's ego and began to tune to it, but this was too much. "I will not." The Black put up a solid block. "I will have nothing to do with your cursed lens. I know what it is, and will have none of it." "Oh, what's the use, Virg?" Kinnison snapped. "Let's get on with it." "A great deal of use, Rod," Samms replied quietly. "This is a turning point. I must be right. I can't be that far wrong." And he again turned his attention to the enemy commander. "Very well, sir. We will continue to use spoken language. I repeat, please come aboard with your 10 fellow vice-admirals. You will not be asked to surrender. You will retain your sidearms, as long as you make no attempt to use them. Whether or not we come to any agreement, you will be allowed to return unharmed to your vessels before the battle is resumed." "What? Sidearms? Returned? You swear it?" "As President of the Galactic Council, in the presence of the highest officers of the Galactic Patrol as witnesses, I swear it." "We will come aboard." "Very well. I will have 10 other lensmen and officers here with me." The Boise, of course, inerted first, followed by the Chicago and 9 of the tremendous teardrops from Bennett. Port Admiral Kinnison and 9 other lensmen joined Samms in the Boise's con room. The tight formation of 11 patrol ships blasted in unison in the space courtesy of meeting the equally tight formation of black warships halfway in the matter of intrinsic velocity. Soon the 2 little subfleets were motionless in respect to each other. 11 black gigs were launched. 11 black vice-admirals came aboard, to the accompaniment of the full military honors customarily granted to visiting admirals of friendly powers. Each was armed with what seemed to be an exact duplicate of the patrol's own current blaster, Lewiston Mark 17. In the lead strode the tall, heavy, gray-haired man with whom Samms had been dealing. Still defiant, still sullen, still concealing sternly his sheer desperation. His block was still on, full strength. The man next in line was much younger than the leader, much less wrought up, much more intent. Samms felt for this man's ego, tuned to it, and got the shock of his life. The black vice-admiral's mind was not at all what he had expected to encounter. It was, in every respect, of lensman grade. "Oh, how? You were not speaking, and— I see. The lens! The lens!" The stranger's mind was for seconds an utterly indescribable turmoil in which relief, gladness, and high anticipation struggled for supremacy. In the next few seconds, even before the visitors had reached their places at the conference table, Virgil Samms and Corander of Petrine exchanged thoughts which would require many thousands of words to express, only a few of which are necessary here. The lens! I have dreamed of such a thing without hope of realization or possibility. How we have been misled! They are, then, actually available upon your world, Samms of Tellus? Not exactly, and not at all generally, and Samms explained as he had explained so many times before. You will wear one sooner than you think. But as to ending this warfare, you survivors are practically all natives of your own world. Petrine? Not practically. We are Petrinos all. The teachers were all in the center. Many remain upon Petrine and its neighboring worlds, but none remain alive here. Olancer, then, who assumed command, is also a Petrino? So hard-headed, I had assumed otherwise. He will be a stumbling block. Is he actually in supreme command? Only by and with our consent under such astounding circumstances as these. He is a reactionary of the old, die-hard, war dog school. He would ordinarily be in supreme command and would be supported by the teachers, if any were here. But I will challenge his authority and theirs, standing upon my right to command my own fleet as I see fit. So will, I think, several others. So go ahead with your meeting. Be seated, gentlemen. All saluted punctiliously and sat down. Now, Vice Admiral Olancer, how do you, a stranger, know my name? I know many things. We have a suggestion to offer, which, if you Petrinos will follow it, will end this warfare. First, please believe that we have no designs upon your planet, nor any quarrel with any of its people who are not hopelessly contaminated by the ideas and the culture of the entities who are back of this whole movement. Quite possibly those whom you refer to as the teachers. You did not know whom you were to fight or why. This was a statement with no hint of question about it. I see now that we did not know all the truth, Olancer admitted stiffly. We were informed and given proof sufficient to make us believe that you were monsters from outer space, rapacious, insatiable, senselessly and callously destructive to all other forms of intelligent life. We suspected something of the kind. Do you others agree, Vice Admiral Corander? Yes, we were shown detailed and documented proofs, stereos of battles in which no quarter was given. We saw system after system conquered, world after world laid waste. We were made to believe that our only hope of continued existence was to meet you and destroy you in space. For if you were allowed to reach Petrine, every man, woman, and child on the planet would either be killed outright or tortured to death. I see now that those proofs were entirely false, completely vicious. They were. Those who spread that lying propaganda and all who support their organization must be and shall be weeded out. Petrine must be and shall be given her rightful place in the Galactic Fellowship of free, independent, and cooperative worlds. So must any and all planets whose peoples wish to adhere to civilization instead of to tyranny and despotism. To further these ends, we Lensmen suggest that you reform your fleet and proceed to Arisia. Arisia? Olancer did not like the idea. Arisia, Samms insisted. Upon leaving Arisia, knowing vastly more than you do now, you will return to your home planet, where you will take whatever steps you will then know to be necessary. We were told that your lenses are hypnotic devices, Olancer sneered, designed to steal away and destroy the minds of any who listen to you. I believe that fully. I will not go to Arisia, nor will any part of Petrine's grand fleet. I will not attack my home planet. I will not do battle against my own people. This is final. I am not saying or implying that you should, but you continue to close your mind to reason. How about you, Vice Admiral Corander, and you others? In the momentary silence, Samms put himself en rapport with the other officers, and was overjoyed at what he learned. I do not agree with Vice Admiral Olancer, Corander said flatly. "He commands, not Grand Fleet, but his subfleet merely, as do we all. I will lead my subfleet to Arisia." "Traitor!" Olancer shouted. He leapt to his feet and drew his blaster, but a tractor beam snatched it from his grasp before he could fire. "You were allowed to wear sidearms, not to use them," Samms said quietly. "How many of you others agree with Corander, and how many with Olancer?" All 9 voted with the younger man. "Very well. Olancer, you may either accept Corander's leadership, or leave this meeting now and take your subfleet directly back to Patrine. Decide now which you prefer to do." "You mean you aren't going to kill me even now? Or even degrade me, or put me under arrest?" "I mean exactly that. What is your decision?" "In that case, I must have been, wrong. I will follow Corander." "A wise choice. Corander, you already know what to expect, except that 4 or 5 other Patrinos now in this room will help you, not only in deciding what must be done upon Patrine, but also in the doing of it. This meeting will adjourn." "But no reprisals?" Corander, in spite of his newly acquired knowledge, was dubious, almost dumbfounded. "No invasion or occupation? No indemnities to your patrol or reparations? No punishment of us, our men, or our families?" "None." "That does not square up even with ordinary military usage." "I know it. It does conform, however, to the policy of the Galactic Patrol, which is to spread throughout our island universe." "You are not even sending your fleet, or heavy units of it, with us to see to it that we follow your instructions?" "It is not necessary. If you need any form of help, you will inform us of your requirements via Lens, as I am conversing with you now, and whatever you want will be supplied. However, I do not expect any such call. You and your fellows are capable of handling the situation. You will soon know the truth, and know that you know it. And when your house cleaning is done, we will consider your application for representation upon the Galactic Council. Goodbye." Thus the Lensman, particularly First Lensman Virgil Samms, brought another sector of the galaxy under the aegis of civilization. End of Chapter 19. Chapter 20 of First Lensman by E. Doc Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. First Lensman, Chapter 20. After the rally, there were a few days during which neither Samms nor Kinnison was on Earth. That the Cosmocrats' presidential candidate and the First Lensman were both with the fleet was not a secret. In fact, it was advertised. Everyone was told why they were out there, and almost everyone approved. Nor was their absence felt. Developments, fast and terrific, were slammed home. Cosmocratic spellbinders in every state of North America waved the flag, pointed with pride and viewed with alarm, in the very best tradition of North American politics. But, above all, there appeared upon every newsstand and in every bookshop of the continent, at the open time of the day following Rally Day, a book of over 1,800 pages of fine print. A book the publication of which had given Samms himself no little concern. "But I'm afraid of it," he had protested. "We know it's true, but there's material on almost every page for the biggest libel and slander suits in history." "I know it," the bald and paunchy Lensman attorney had replied. "Fully. I hope they do take action against us, but I'm absolutely certain they won't." "You hope they do?" "Yes. If they take the initiative, they can't prevent us from presenting our evidence in full, and there is no court in existence, however corrupt, before which we could not win. What they want and must have is delay, avoidance of any issue until after the election." "I see." Samms was convinced. The location of the patrol's Grand Fleet had been concealed from all inhabitants of the Solarian system, friends and foes alike. But the climactic battle, liberating as it did, energy sufficient to distort the very warp and woof of the fabric of space itself, could not be hidden or denied, or even belittled. It was not, however, advertised or blazoned abroad. Then as now, the newshawks wanted to know, instantly and via long-range communicators, vastly more than those responsible for security cared to tell. Then as now, the latter said as little as it was humanly possible to say. Everyone knew that the patrol had won a magnificent victory, but nobody knew who or what the enemy had been. Since the rank and file knew it, everyone knew that only a fraction of the Black Fleet had actually been destroyed, but nobody knew where the remaining vessels went or what they did. Everyone knew that about 95% of the patrol's astonishingly huge Grand Fleet had come from and was on its way back to the planet Bennett, and knew, since Bennettons would in a few weeks be scampering gaily all over space, in general what Bennett was, but nobody knew why it was. Thus, when the North American contingent landed at New York Spaceport, everyone whom the newsmen could reach was literally mobbed. However, in accordance with the aphorism ascribed to the wise old owl, those who knew the least said the most. But the telenews ace who had once interviewed both Kinnison and Samms wasted no time upon small fry. He insisted on seeing the top two lensmen, and kept on insisting until he did see them. "Nothing to say," Kinnison said curtly, leaving no doubt whatever that he meant it. "All talking, if any, will be done by First Lensman Samms." Now, all you millions of telenews listeners, I am interviewing First Lensman Samms himself. A little closer to the mic, please, First Lensman. Now, sir, what everybody wants to know is, who are the Blacks? I don't know. You don't know? On the lens, sir? On the lens. I still don't know. I see. But you have suspicions or ideas? You can guess? I can guess, but that's all it would be, a guess. And my guess, folks, is that his guess would be a very highly informed guess. Will you tell the public, First Lensman Samms, what your guess is? I will. If this reply astonished the newshawk, it staggered Kinnison and the others who knew Samms best. It was, however, a coldly calculated political move. While it will probably be several weeks before we can furnish detailed and unassailable proof, it is my considered opinion that the Black Fleet was built and controlled by the Morgantown-Isaacson machine. That they, all unknown to any of us, enticed, corrupted, and seduced a world, or several worlds, to their program of domination and enslavement. That they intended by armed force to take over the continent of North America, and through it, the whole Earth and all the other planets adherent to civilization. That they intended to hunt down and kill every lensman, and to subvert the Galactic Council to their own ends. This is what you wanted? That's fine, sir. Just what we wanted. But just one more thing, sir. The newsman had obtained infinitely more than he had expected to get, yet, good newsman-like, he wanted more. Just a word, if you will, Mr. Samms, as to these trials and the White Book. I can add very little, I'm afraid, to what I have already said, and what is in the Black Book, and that little can be classed as "I told you so." We are trying, and will continue to try, to force those criminals to trial. To break up, to prohibit an unending series of hair-splitting delays. We want, and are determined to get, legal action. To make each of those we have accused defend himself in court and under oath. Morgan and his crew, however, are working desperately to avoid any action at all, because they know that we can and will prove every allegation we have made. The telenews ace signed off. Samms and Kinnison went to their respective offices, and cosmocratic orators throughout the nation had a field day. They glowed and scintillated with triumph. They yelled themselves hoarse, leather-lunged tump-thumpers though they were, in pointing out the unsullied purity, the spotless perfection of their own party and its every candidate for office, in shuddering revulsion at the never-to-be-sufficiently condemned, proved and demonstrated villainy and blackguardy of the opposition. And the nationalists, although they had been dealt a terrific and entirely unexpected blow, worked near miracles of politics with what they had. Morgan and his minions ranted and raved. They were being jobbed. They were being crucified by the moneyed powers. All those allegations and charges were sheerest fabrications, false, utterly vicious, containing nothing whatever of truth. They, not the patrol, were trying to force a showdown, to vindicate themselves and to confute those unspeakably unscrupulous lensmen before Election Day. And they were succeeding. Why otherwise had not a single one of the thousands of accused even been arrested? Ask that lying First Lensman, Virgil Samms. Ask that rock-hearted, iron-headed, conscienceless murderer, Roderick Kinnison. But do not, at peril of your sanity, submit your minds to their lenses. And why, the reader asks, were not at least some of those named persons arrested before Election Day? And your historian must answer frankly that he does not know. He is not a lawyer. It would be of interest, to some few of us, to follow in detail at least one of those days of legal battling in one of the high courts of the land, to quote verbatim at least a few of the many thousands of pages of transcript. But to most of us, the technicalities involved would be boring in the extreme. But couldn't the voters tell easily enough which side was on the offensive and which was on the defensive? Which pressed for action and which insisted on postponement and delay? They could have, easily enough, if they had cared enough about the basic issues involved to make the necessary mental effort, but almost everyone was too busy doing something else. And it was so much easier to take somebody else's word for it. And finally, thinking is an exercise to which all too few brains are accustomed. But Morgan neither ranted nor raved nor blustered when he sat in conference with his faintly blue superior, who had come storming in as soon as he had learned of the crushing defeat of the Black Fleet. The Colonian was very highly concerned, so much so that the undertone of his peculiar complexion was turning slowly to a delicate shade of green. How did that happen? How could it happen? Why was I not informed of the patrol's real power? How could you be guilty of such stupidity? Now I'll have to report to Scran of the Ike. He's pure, undiluted poison. And if word of this catastrophe ever gets up to Plur— "Come down out of the stratosphere, Fernald," Morgan countered bitingly. "Don't try to make me the goat. I won't sit still for it. It happened because they could build a bigger fleet than we could. You were in on that, all of it. You knew what we were doing and approved of it, all of it. You were as badly fooled as I was. You were not informed because I could find out nothing. I could learn no more of their Bennett than they could of our Petrine. As to reporting, you will, of course, do as you please. But I would advise you not to cry too much before you're really hurt. This battle isn't over yet, my friend." The Colonian had been a badly shaken entity. It was a measure of his state of mind that he did not liquidate the temerarious Tellurian then and there. But since Morgan was as undisturbed as ever, and as sure of himself, he began to regain his wonted aplomb. His color became again its normal pale blue. "I will forgive your insubordination this time, since there were no witnesses, but use no more such language to me," he said stiffly. "I fail to perceive any basis for your optimism. The only chance now remaining is for you to win the election. And how can you do that? You must be, losing ground steadily and rapidly." "Not as much as you might think." Morgan pulled down a large, carefully drawn chart. "This line represents the hidebound nationalists, whom nothing we can do will alienate from the party. This one the equally hidebound cosmocrats. The balance of power lies, as always, with the independents, these here. And many of them are not as independent as is supposed. We can buy or bring pressure to bear on half of them. That cuts them down to this size here. So, no matter what the patrol does, it can affect only this relatively small block here, and it is this block we are fighting for. We are losing a little ground, and steadily, yes, since we can't conceal from anybody with half a brain the fact that we're doing our best to keep the cases from ever coming to trial. But here's the actual observed line of sentiment, as determined from psychological indices up to yesterday. Here is the extrapolation of that line to Election Day. It forecasts us to get just under 49% of the total vote." "And is there anything cheerful about that?" Fernald asked frostily. "I'll say there is." Morgan's big face assumed a sneering smile, an expression never seen by any voter. "This chart deals only with living, legally registered, bona fide voters. Now, if we can come that close to winning an absolutely honest election, how do you figure we can possibly lose the kind this one is going to be? We're in power, you know. We've got this machine, and we know how to use it." "Oh yes, I remember vaguely. You told me about North American politics once, a few years ago. Dead men, ringers, repeaters, ballot box stuffing, and so on, you said." "And so on is right, Chief," Morgan assured him heartily. "Everything goes this time. It'll be one of the biggest landslides in North American history." "I will, then, defer any action until after the election." "That will be the smart thing to do, Chief. Then you won't have to take any or make any report at all." And upon this highly satisfactory note the conference closed. And Morgan was actually as confident as he had appeared. His charts are actual and factual. He knew the power of money and the effectiveness of pressure. He knew the capabilities of the various units of his machine. He did not, however, know two things: Jill Samms' insidious, deeply hidden Voters' Protective League, and the bright flame of loyalty pervading the Galactic Patrol. Thus, between times of bellowing and screaming his carefully prepared rabble-rousing speeches, he watched calmly and contentedly the devious workings of his smooth and efficient organization. Until the day before election, that is. Then hordes of young men and young women went suddenly and briefly to work. At least 4 in every precinct of the entire nation. They visited, it seemed, every residence and every dwelling unit everywhere. They asked questions and took notes and vanished. And the machine's operatives, after the alarm was given, could not find man or girl or notebook. And the Galactic Patrol, which had never before paid any attention to elections, had given leave and ample time to its every North American citizen. Vessels of the North American contingent were grounded and practically emptied of personnel. Bases and stations were depopulated, and even from every distant world every patrolman registered in any North American precinct came to spend the day at home. Morgan began then to worry, but there was nothing he could do about the situation, or was there? If the civilian boys and girls were checking the registration books, and they were, it was as legally appointed checkers. If the uniformed boys and girls were all coming home to vote, and they were, that too was their inalienable right. But boys and girls were notoriously prone to accident and to debauchery. But again Morgan was surprised, and this time taken heavily aback. The web which had protected Grand Rally so efficiently, but greatly enlarged now, was functioning again, and Morgan and his minions spent a sleepless and thoroughly uncomfortable night. Election Day dawned clear, bright, and cool, auguring a record turnout. Voting was early and extraordinarily heavy. The polls were crowded. There was, however, very little disorder. Surprisingly little in view of the fact that the cosmocratic watchers, instead of being the venal whites of custom, were cold-eyed, unreachable men and women who seemed to know by sight every voter in the precinct. At least they spotted on sight and challenged without hesitation every ringer, every dead one, every repeater, and every impostor who claimed the right to vote. And those challenges, being borne out in every case by the carefully checked registration lists, were in every case upheld. Not that all of the policemen on duty, especially in the big cities, were above suspicion, of course. But whenever any one of those officers began to show a willingness to play ball with the machine, a calm, quiet-eyed patrolman would remark casually, "Better see that this election stays straight, Bud, and strictly according to the lists and signatures, or you're apt to find yourself listed in the big book along with the rest of the rats." It was not that the machine liked the way things were going, or that it did not have goon squads on the job. It was that there were, everywhere and always, more patrolmen than there were goons. And those patrolmen, however young in years some of them might have appeared to be, were space bronze veterans, space-hardened fighting men, armed with the last word in blasters, Lewiston, Mark 17. To the boy's friends and neighbors, of course, his Lewiston was practically invisible. It was merely an article of clothing, the same as his pants. It carried no more of significance, of threat, or of menace than did the pistol and the club of the friendly Irish cop on the beat. But the goon did not see the patrolman as a friend. He saw the keen, clear, sharply discerning eyes, the long, strong fingers, the smoothly flowing muscles, so eloquent of speed and of power. He saw the Lewiston for what it was, the deadliest, most destructive hand weapon known to man. Above all, he saw the difference in numbers. 6 or 7 or 8 patrolmen to 4 or 5 or 6 of his own kind. If more hoods arrived, so did more spacemen. If some departed, so did a corresponding number of the wearers of the space black and silver. "Ain't you getting tired of sticking around here, George?" one mobster asked confidentially to one of the patrolmen. "I am. What say we and some of you fellows round up some girls and go have us a party?" George denied. His voice was gay and careless, but his eyes were icy cold. "My uncle's cousin's stepson is running for second assistant dog catcher, and I can't leave until I find out whether he wins or not." Thus nothing happened. Thus the invisible but nevertheless terrific tension did not erupt into open battle. And thus, for the first time in North America's long history, a presidential election was 99 1/99/100% pure. Evening came. The polls closed. The Cosmocrats' headquarters for the day, the grand ballroom of the Hotel Vandervoort, became the goal of every patrolman who thought he stood any chance at all of getting in. Kinnison had been there all day, of course. So had Joy, his wife, who, for lack of space, had been sadly neglected in these annals. Betty, their daughter, had come in early, accompanied by a husky and personable young lieutenant, who has no other place in this story. Jack Kinnison arrived with Dimples Maynard, dazzlingly blonde, wearing a screamingly red wisp of silk. She, too, had been shamefully slighted here, although she was never slighted anywhere else. "The first time I ever saw her," Jack was wont to say, "I went right into a flat spin, running around in circles and biting myself in the small of the back, and couldn't pull out of it for 4 hours." That Miss Maynard should be a very special item is not at all surprising, in view of the fact that she was to become the wife of one of the Kinnisons and the mother of another. The first Lensman, who had been in and out, came in to stay. So did Jill and her inseparable Mason Northrop. And so did others, singly or by 2s or 3s. Lensmen and their wives, Conway and Cleo Costigan, Dr. and Mrs. Rodebush, and Cleveland, Admiral and Mrs. Clayton, ditto Schweikert and Dr. Nels Bergenholm, and others. Nor were they all North Americans or even human. Rularion was there, and so was blocky, stocky Dronvire of Rigel 4. No outsider could tell ever what any Lensman was thinking, to say nothing of such a monstrous Lensman as Dronvire. But that hotel had been covered as no political headquarters had ever been covered before. The returns came in, seesawing maddeningly back and forth, faster and faster. The maritime provinces split 50-50. Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, Cosmocrat. New York, upstate, Cosmocrat. New York City, on the basis of incomplete but highly significant returns, was piling up a huge nationalist majority. Pennsylvania, Labor, Nationalists. Ohio, Farmers, Cosmocrat. 12 southern states went 6 and 6. Chicago, as usual, solidly for the machine. Likewise Quebec and Ottawa and Montreal and Toronto and Detroit and Kansas City and St. Louis and New Orleans and Denver. Then northern and western and far southern states came in, and evened the score. Saskatchewan, Alberta, Britcol, and Alaska all went Cosmocrat. So did Washington, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mex, and most of the states of Mexico. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the Cosmocrats had a slight but definite lead, and were finally holding it. At 4 o'clock, the lead was larger, but California was still an unknown quantity. California could wreck everything. How would California go? Especially, how would California's 2 metropolitan districts, the 2 most independent and free-thinking and least predictable big cities of the nation, how would they go? At 5 o'clock, California seemed safe. Except for Los Angeles and San Francisco, the Cosmocrats had swept the state, and in those two great cities they held a commanding lead. It was still mathematically possible, however, for the Nationalists to win. "It's in the bag! Let's start the celebration!" someone shouted, and others took up the cry. "Stop it! No!" Kinnison's parade ground voice cut through the noise. "No celebration is in order or will be held until the results become certain or Witherspoon concedes." The two events came practically together. Witherspoon conceded a couple of minutes before it became mathematically impossible for him to win. Then came the celebration, which went on and on interminably. At the first opportunity, however, Kinnison took Samms by the arm, led him without a word into a small office, and shut the door. Samms, also saying nothing, sat down in the swivel chair, put both feet up on the desk, lit a cigarette, and inhaled deeply. "Well, Virg, satisfied?" Kinnison broke the silence at last. His lens was off. "We're on our way." "Yes, Rod, fully, at last." No more than his friend did he dare to use his lens, to plumb the depths he knew so well were there. Now it will roll, under its own power. No one man now is, or ever will be, indispensable to the Galactic Patrol. Nothing can stop it now. End of Chapter 20. Epilogue of the First Lensman by E. Doc Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. First Lensman. Epilogue. The murder of Senator Morgan in his own private office was never solved. If it had occurred before the election, suspicion would certainly have fallen upon Roderick Kinnison, but as it was, it did not. By no stretch of the imagination could anyone conceive of Rod the Rock kicking a man after he had knocked him down. Not that Morgan did not have powerful and vindictive enemies in the underworld. He had so many that it proved impossible to fasten the crime to any one of them. Officially, Kinnison was on a 5-year leave of absence from the Galactic Patrol. The office of Port Admiral had been detached entirely from the fleet and assigned to the office of the President of North America. Actually, however, in every respect that counted, Roderick Kinnison was still Port Admiral, and would remain so until he died or until the Council retired him by force. Officially, Kinnison was taking a short, well-earned vacation from the job in which he had been so outstandingly successful. Actually, he was doing a quick flit to Petrine, to get personally acquainted with the new lensmen and to see what kind of a job they were doing. Besides, Virgil Samms was already there. He arrived, he got acquainted, he saw, he approved. "How about coming back to Tullus with me, Virg?" he asked when the visiting was done. "I've got to make a speech, and it'd be nice to have you hold my head." "I'd be glad to," and the Chicago took off. Half of North America was dark when they neared Tullus. All of it, apparently, was obscured by clouds. Only the navigating officers of the vessel knew where they were, nor did either of the two lensmen care. They were having too much fun arguing about the talents and abilities of their respective grandsons. The Chicago landed. A bug was waiting. The two lensmen, without an order being given, were whisked away. Samms had not asked where the speech was to be given, and Kinnison simply did not realize that he had not told him all about it. Thus Samms had no idea that he was just leaving Spokane Spaceport, Washington. After a few miles of fast, open-country driving, the bug reached the city. It slowed down, swung into brightly lighted Maple Street, and passed a sign reading Cannon Hill something or other, neither of which names meant anything to either lensman. Kinnison looked at his friend's red-thatched head and glanced at his watch. "Looking at you reminds me, I need a haircut," he remarked. "Should have got one aboard, but didn't think of it. Joy told me if I come home without it, she'll braid it in pigtails and tie it up with pink ribbons, and you're shaggier than I am. You've got to get one, or else buy yourself a violin. What say we do it now?" "Have we got time enough?" "Plenty." Then to the driver, "Stop at the first barber shop you see, please." "Yes, sir. There's a good one a few blocks further along." The bug sped down Maple Street, turned sharply into plainly marked 12th Avenue. Neither lensman saw the sign. "Here you are, sir." "Thanks." There were 2 barbers and 2 chairs, both empty. The lensman, noticing that the place was neatly kept and meticulously clean, sat down and resumed their discussion of 2 extremely unusual infants. The barbers went busily to work. "Just as well, though, better really, that the kids didn't marry each other at that," Kinnison concluded finally. "The way it is, we've each got a grandson. It'd be tough to have to share one with you." Samms made no reply to this sally, for something was happening. The fact that this fair-skinned, yellow-haired, blue-eyed barber was left-handed had not rung any bells. There were lots of left-handed barbers. He had neither seen nor heard the cat, a less-than-half-grown, gray, tiger-striped kitten, which, after standing up on its hind legs to sniff ecstatically at his nylon-clad ankles, had uttered a couple of almost inaudible meows and had begun to purr happily. Crouching, tensing its strong little legs, it leapt almost vertically upward. Its tail struck the barber's elbow. Hastily brushing the kitten aside, and beginning profuse apologies both for his awkwardness and for the presence of the cat, he had never done such a thing before, and he would drown him forthwith. The barber applied a styptic pencil, and recollection hit Samms a pile-driver blow. "Well, I'm a—" He voiced 3 highly un-Samms-like, highly specific expletives, which, as Mentor had foretold so long before, were both self-derogatory and profane. Then, as full realization dawned, he bit a word squarely in 2. "Excuse me, please, Mr. Carbonaro, for this outrageous display. It was not the scratch, nor was any of it your fault. Nothing you could have done would have—" "You know my name?" the astonished barber interrupted. "Yes, you were, recommended to me by a friend." Whatever Samms could say would make things worse. The truth, wild as it was, would have to be told, at least in part. "You do not look like an Italian, but perhaps you have enough of that racial heritage to believe in prophecy?" "Of course, sir. There have always been prophets, true prophets." "Good. This event was foretold in detail, in such complete detail that I was deeply, terribly shocked. Even to the kitten. You call it Thomas?" "Yes, sir. Thomas Aquinas." "It is actually a female. In here, Thomasina." The kitten had been climbing enthusiastically up his leg. Now, as he held a pocket invitingly open, she sprang into it, settled down, and began to purr blissfully. While the barbers and Kinnison stared, pop-eyed, Samms went on. "She is determined to adopt me, and it would be a shame not to requite such affection. Would you part with her for, say, 10 credits?" "10 credits? I'll be glad to give her to you for nothing." "10 it is, then. One more thing. Rod, you always carry a pocket rule. Measure this scratch, will you? You'll find it's mighty close to 3 millimeters long." "Not close, Virg. It's exactly 3 millimeters, as near as this vernier can scale it." "And just above and parallel to the cheekbone." "Check. Just above and as parallel as though it had been ruled there by a draftsman." "Well, that's that. Let's get finished with the haircuts before you're late for your speech." And the barbers, with thoughts which will be left to the imagination, resumed their interrupted tasks. "Spill it, Virg." Kinnison lensed the pent-up thought. If Carbonaro, who did not know Samms at all, had been amazed at what had been happening, Kinnison, who had known him so long and so well, had been literally and completely dumbfounded. "What in hell's behind this? What's the story? Give!" Samms told him, and a mental silence fell, a silence too deep for intelligible thought. Each was beginning to realize that he never would and never could know what Mentor of Arisia really was. The End of First Lensman by E. Doc Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.